furs can clothe your people. Sabela nodded at that and scribbled something on a piece of paper. Some of my vassals have also shown interest in digging for metal and gemstone deposits in their lands. However, it has to be seen if anything will be found that would outshine simple domestic production. There are noteworthy amber, tin and copper deposits north of the wall that may be looked upon as well. Large quantities of these materials, and bronze they made of it, have been confiscated by my men, and some small trade between some wilderling clans and the Night's Watch has always existed. We intend to include those in the trade route as much as possible, he continued. Further south, iron, tin and lead from the Iron Islands will join the trade, as well as grain and other goods from the riverlands. Precious metals from the Westerlands, as well as the manufactured goods from their smiths will join it further south before reaching the Reach. I will have to interrupt you there, King Stark. While this is undeniably true, we could simply trade with the Westerlands ourselves for those. The Hightower interjected. You are right. Nevertheless, my influence might make things easier on you to do so. He replied. Traders from the north, Iron Islands and Riverlands going south might also be a short to medium-term solution in replacing your lost trading fleet. In turn they would buy fruits and other foodstuffs, wines, manufactured goods and others in the Reach, making you some good coin to rebuild your lands. He finished. Again, he got a nod in reply. You mentioned infrastructure. My traders would need quick places to dock in Old Town. I heard that your harbor was largely destroyed. Maybe in rebuilding, a section could be destined for our trading ships. On our way we would also need to provision at either Old Oak or the Shield Islands. He summarized. Interesting ideas, I must say. Places to provision will soon be possible at both, although I believe Old Oak will yield more results short term. I personally like your proposals for Old Town and will personally oversee the project, although I have some requirements of my own. Firstly, I would ask places for our Hightower ships to dock in Seaguard in return for the same terms. Secondly, we won't allow Ironborn traders in our lands. If they wish to trade with us, they should sell or buy from you or the Lannisters. We will not enrich those scum by having their trade ships dock where their military fleet couldn't. He couldn't believe his ears. This would make the Ironborn more dependent on him and would further enrich his lords and traders. I agree, but I will do you one better. I will also allow you docking places in Barrowton. That way you can buy northern wares directly from the source. It is the trade hub for the southwest and I intend to force traders from along Sea Dragon Point, Bear Island, the Wolf's Wood and the mountains to stop and sell part of their wares there. Sabela looked at him in surprise but agreed happily. He would not use the north as a backyard for trade in the Riverlands. In time, Barrowton could become to the west what White Harbor was to the east, albeit smaller. Wintertown would serve as a commercial hub for domestic use, as well as a place for the Wolfswood clans, Sewin, Bolton and Umber traders to sell their produce to traders before it headed off to one of the two towns. Land trade? Hightower asked. Custom for the last 300 years had Riverlander, Crownlander and Reach traders travel to King's Landing and sell their produce there, with some smaller border traffic happening in small towns. We would like to reverse that practice. There will still be a town at the Blackwater that will trade on land and water, but it will have to face much more competition from Duskendale and Maidenpool. Trade between the Reach and Riverlands can and must go more directly. I am listening. He pulled out a map of the south. We propose that a road would be built from Riverrun to connect towards the Reach. I have studied the Reach and I think Bitterbridge or Golden Grove to be the ideal locations. However, that I will leave to you. On my part I would build a grand road from Riverrun through Acorn Hole and other small keeps to Stony September. I would improve smaller domestic roads leading to Riverrun or Stony September as well. From there the road will go to a new town in our newly acquired territories north of the Gold Road. This will serve to lessen traffic on the part of the King's Road from Lord Harroway's town to King's Landing. We would like this road to continue into your lands to create a direct connection between Highgarden and Riverrun. I certainly understand your reasoning for it, but what would be ours? The knight asked him. Stony September is small and was recently completely destroyed, the area desolated by Tywin Lannister. The same can be said for much of the southern Riverlands. Riverrun has no significant town to speak of either. King's Landing will cease to exist as a hub to sell your produce from the Reach proper. This way you can create a better trade route that your king could tax, as well as create friendlier relations to our kingdom. Otherwise your trade could collapse or leave your kingdom. Besides, Stony September is in the process of being rebuilt and it will be larger than before the war once winter has ended. The Tully lands have expanded and have more wares to sell, so a small town will grow there, and as I said, local roads will attract products from all over the riverlands. I get what you are saying. The knight slowly answered, as he looked to the map. He also scrolled for a long time through the maps he had brought with himself. After a while he spoke up. I agree that it would be a good idea. We will agree to help construct a road from Bitterbridge to the Gold Road on the condition that you extend the road to Riverrun. Trade will go with lower tariffs, the same you gave your allies. You will allow our traders to sell our wares across all the towns on that route, and we will allow you the same in the other direction. Planning and mapping for the road will continue as soon as my return to High Garden. Nevertheless, the construction will have to wait until after winter. That is agreeable to me. I will have my maester write up a document and deliver it to you in the morning. You can look it over and we will discuss the final details the day after tomorrow. Very well, it was a pleasure doing business with you, King Stark. I feel much the same, Sir Hightower. Let us toast on a new era of peace and trade that will enrich both us and our people. The glasses clattered against each other, and for the first time he let himself hope. Maybe peace would be an option after all. Chapter 72, A Wedding. 302 AC. Lord Harry on Carstark. He walked to the window and looked across the snow-covered hills. When he looked to the left, he saw people walking around in Wintertown. The scenery was beautiful, almost as good as Carhold's. He had arrived at Winterfell a few days ago. Since then, he had spent his days with his siblings. It was good to see his sister again, and Edara was a joy to be around. He had spent many hours playing with his little niece. Yesterday, him and his siblings had spent a whole afternoon with just the three of them and Edara. They had told her stories about Carhold and he had gifted her a dress in the Carstark colors. She had loved it, joyously screaming about the sun and wolf that were embroidered upon it. He would never admit it, but it had given him a lot of food for thought. He longed to have his own family now, and he knew he was obliged to his house to start one soon anyway. Ailey had looked at him yesterday as if she understood, but she had said nothing. Even so, it had taken away all his trepidation for marriage. That evening, after he had helped with putting Edara to bed, he had sat down with the Great Yon and had finalized his own betrothal to the man's only surviving daughter. It was the best marriage he could have arranged for himself, as the Umbers were strong and had gotten even stronger since the war. Their main lands had been enlarged with lands of the new gift, whilst the Great Yon's younger brother got the former capital's lands. Great allies to have both north and south of the neck. He had known Serena Umber for years through the dealings their parents had, as well as his friendship with Smalljan. She was tall, had brown hair and was surprisingly elegant for an Umber, both whilst dancing or training with her knife. He didn't love her, but most noble couples didn't love each other at the start. Nevertheless, they were friends of some sort. Even if love wasn't on the cards, she had the potential to be a good lady of Carhold and mother to his children. He couldn't ask for much more. Her dowry had also been excellent. He had gotten the promise of 5,000 golden dragons up front, mutual investments on the road system between Last Hearth and Carhold, minor trade concessions, and the Great Yon had gotten the permission of his younger brother to promise him a reserved docking place in the new harbour along the Blackwater during spring, summer and autumn. One of his ideas had been to spend parts of the coin he had won in war on a few trading cogs of his own. He didn't have the funds or infrastructure to start a whole trading fleet, but just 2 or 3 cogs that would trade further than simply going up and down to White Harbour could be an interesting stream of revenue. He wanted one to trade directly with Bravos and Lorath and another to trade with the Vale and Blackwater Bay. Selling small parts of their lumber without any middlemen would bring House Carstark some extra coin. More importantly, it would help them to gain trade contacts for future endeavors. He hadn't been the only one that had been thinking about betrothals or marriages after the war. Heck, that was the reason he was in Winterfell in the first place. Not a day had gone by since his arrival here without some nobles announcing their betrothals. Some had even married already. Daisy Mormont had married Owen Norrie in a small ceremony before coming here, something most of their friends had been expecting. It was a matrilineal marriage, meaning their children would be Mormonts and stand to inherit Bear Island in time. Roose Riswell had been awarded with some of the remaining lands in the new gift by Rob and had moved quickly. He had already married a daughter of the Val clan, the most powerful northern mountain clan. He looked with interest at the developments in these lands and would continue to follow them closely. The Tall Heart succession had successfully been dealt with. Rob had given Torrens Square to the late Sir Helman's brother Leopold instead of his daughter Edara. He needed a strong hand to rule the land and help its population heal the scars that the Ironborn had left. However, to smoothen things over in the long run, Edara was betrothed to Leopold's eldest son Brandon. By way of their children, Helman's line would be restored to the rule of the Tall Heart lands soon. Dozens of smaller marriages and betrothals were had between smaller families or side branches of the main ones. The most interesting one to him was the marriage of his cousin Osric to Jane Poole. Jane was apparently the heiress of a small masterly house sworn to Winterfell. Nevertheless, they had become quite wealthy as Jane's late father had served as their steward for 2 decades. Osric had fallen in love with the girl and had even promised that their children would take on the Poole name to continue the family. This was a thing he approved of, as he didn't want distant Karstarks running around the north where he couldn't influence or control them. None had made more or better deals than the Umbers though. Aside from his betrothal to Serena, many others had gotten betrothed. Smalljan had gotten a hold of Lyra Mormont. An interesting marriage now that rumors circulated that her older sister Alysanne would receive lands on the Stony Shore. His younger brother Harmond had made an even better marriage. It had come as a shock to many when it had been announced a few nights ago that he had been betrothed to Winifred Marndaly. The future heiress of White Harbour was a highly coveted bride for many men in the north. By marrying her, the 2 Umber brothers would control Last Hearth and White Harbour in time, whilst their sister ruled with him in Carhold. He had welcomed the marriage, as it meant that his future children would be cousins to the Marndalys in time. Some of the conditions of the marriage had been that Harmond was placed after his youngest brother in the succession and that his children would be named after his wife's house. A small price to pay for a second son when it meant ruling over the richest city in the kingdom in time. He wondered if Harmond Umber could begin to reverse some of the Andal influence in the southeast of the north. Oh, how his father would have loved to have seen that. The Umbers hadn't even stopped there. The Great Jon had betrothed the 2 sisters of his late brother Osric as well. The youngest, Birina, was to marry Lance Hornwood, formerly Snow and new heir to his father's lands, whilst her older sister Ura was betrothed to the heir of House Riker to help Roderick Umber's influence in the south. Roderick himself had already married a daughter of House Peage before coming north. In a few months, the Umbers had constructed a web of alliances stretching across Last Hearth, Carhold, Bear Island, the Stony Shore, Hornwood, White Harbour, Fairmarket, King's Landing and Duskendale. Many hushed conversations had been had about it by other prominent families and counter-moves were being made, but he felt good about it. His children would benefit from the network as well and his relations with his Umber neighbours were better than his father could have ever dreamed of. That left only the most prominent marriage of the decade, the one they were all here attending. He straightened out his black doublet and looked into the mirror upon the 2 white suns embroidered upon his shoulders. He picked up his big fur coat and put it on. After taking a deep breath, he walked out of his room. He followed the stream of visitors towards the Godswood and soon he was standing under snow-covered trees. He looked upon the torches that were positioned throughout the clearing and the banners that hung from branches. In front of the heart tree, the groom stood. His face like ice, not betraying any emotion. This marriage had been another reason for the Great Jon's haste in making marriage alliances. Even though both his sons had tried to convince him that the groom was no threat, the Great Jon had said that it was better to be needlessly prepared against him than it being the other way around. He looked upon the pale pink cloak the man carried around his shoulders. It was beautifully lined with red wool and the flayed man of House Bolton had been stitched intimidatingly across the whole of the cloak. His relations with the Boltons were good, but it never hurt to build in some safety against the rising Bolton influence. As such, an alliance between the Umbers, Mormonts, Karstarks, Hornwoods and Marndalys had come to pass. Prematurely crushing any hopes Domeric might have had of trying anything in the future. He hated that he needed to think like that about his friends, but it was his job to look out for the future of House Karstark. He looked upon his sister and niece standing closest to the weirwood. To protect his family, the North would have to be stable. No one could jeopardize their safety, not even his friends. Sounds were heard from behind him and he turned around. Rob walked in with Sansa on his arm. She looked beautifully. She wore a white and grey dress. Fur and wool were lined in intricate patterns of wolves to protect her from the cold, whilst still giving an elegance rarely seen north of the neck. Her red hair shone brighter than ever, accentuated by the small copper crown that rested upon her head. Her face looked regal, but her eyes shone with merriment once she looked upon Domeric's presence. He had half-heartedly tried to vie for her attention himself, but she had never had an eye for him. On top of that, Rob had made it clear that a second marriage between any of his siblings and House Karstark was out of the question, as he needed to balance the influence between his vassals, and marriages were an important part of that. Seeing her like this made him feel that that had been the right choice. Then the ceremony started in earnest. "Who comes before the old gods?" Lady Barbary Dustin asked as she stood up. She was the closest family Domeric had, and he had asked her to do the honors. "Princess Sansa, of House Stark, a woman grown, true-born and noble. She comes to beg the blessings of the gods." "Who comes to claim her?" Rob replied regally. "Domeric, of House Bolton, Lord of the Dread Fort and head of my house." "Who gives her?" "I, Robb Stark, King of the North and the Riverlands." "Her elder brother." His brother-in-law responded loudly. Lady Barbie continued after this. "Princess Sansa, do you take this man as your husband before the gods?" "I take this man," Sansa said clearly, joy audible in her voice. After this, both walked forward towards the weirwood tree and Rob gave Domeric Sansa's hand. They knelt before the weirwood and he and almost all the nobles followed them in their prayer. He prayed for the safety of his family and house. He asked the gods to bless him with numerous healthy children and to let him find some sort of joy of his own with Serena. Lastly, he requested them to keep Domeric's intentions with this union pure for the Sarkea of Alis and her family. After a short while, Domeric stood up and removed Sansa's maiden cloak and replaced it with the Bolton one he pulled from his shoulders. Dom had told him that his aunt had made it for him, a thing which apparently meant a great deal to him. They had chosen not to use the one Roose had cloaked his mother with, as their marriage had been entirely unhappy. The signs for the marriage seemed good enough. His father had always told him that it was a bad omen to have it snow during a wedding, yet no snow had fallen since last night and the skies were clear. The newly wedded couple walked out of the woods, with over 100 nobles trailing behind them. Once at the edge of the forest, Domeric scooped his bride up and carried her inside towards the hall. A tradition which caused some of the nobles to cheer. Not much later, the wedding feast was in full swing. He was positioned on the first table below the high one together with the Riswells as the extended families of the Starks and Boltons. Lady Dustin was up on the dais with Domeric and seemed to in deep conversation with Rob. He himself talked for a long time with all of the Riswells. With Lord Roderick he talked about the effects the Ironborn incursions had had on their lands and the future of the region with the king's plans for more trade along the Sunset Sea. His Roger told him about his marriage to the sister of Lord Timothy Flint of Flint's Finger. An interesting union, as the Flints had been good friends of the Umbers for decades. The Flints and Riswells could benefit from each other with Rob's new trade ideas, and it could also indirectly put them more in the middle of the bed between his own alliance and the Bolton one. Roose Riswell told him about his visit to his new lands and his blossoming relations with some of the mountain clans and the Night's Watch. His young wife told him about her family and life amongst the clan folk. After the opening dance, people started mingling more in between the tables. He himself danced with his betrothed and Osric's wife Jane. He danced with the bride once too, before Domeric claimed her once more. He looked around and saw Rob dancing with Ailey, whilst his younger sister Arya seemed to be dancing with Cleesawin. He had never been much of a dancer, so after a short while he sat down with the Mandaelis, Umbers and Hornwoods at a table whilst his betrothed danced on. Once more his allies discussed the implications of this marriage, as well as those of their own. After a while, Jon came down from the high table and sat with them. He was immediately invited to the Mandaeli wedding in 2 months' time from now, and he gladly accepted. All the nobles at the table would accompany Lord Wyman to White Harbour and be hosted there until the wedding. Afterwards, they would all join the Umbers at last hearth for the double ceremony of him and Serena and Smalljan with Lyra Mormont. The travel distances during winter were crazy, but for their families it had to be done. Rob had promised to join them in last hearth for the ceremony, as he was planning to travel on to see the wall afterwards. He wouldn't be able to go to White Harbor as well, as he needed to rule the kingdoms in the meantime, but Jon would take Bran as official representative of the Starks. "How do you feel about your new title, Jon?" Lord Wyman asked the official new Lord of Sea Dragon Point. Jon grinned from ear to ear. "It feels wonderful, my lord. I haven't had the possibility to visit the lands myself, but after all the weddings I will be heading that way. In the meantime, I have already sent a few dozen laborers and craftsmen that way. I have looked upon the maps for dozens of hours and have identified 3 possible spots to build a keep on. I have been looking at places with a natural harbor, as Rob wants me to establish a small trading town in future years. I have sent loyal people ahead of me to scout out these lands and clear them for building projects." "All 3 of them at once?" Lord Wyman responded, whilst raising his eyebrow. "Aye, all 3 at once. They are spread out over the territory and the other 2 would be good places for me to raise small vassals with their own tower and fishing villages in the future. It would help to control the lands and repel future invaders." "You plan to raise vassals on the lands?" Lord Harley's Hornwood asked with interest. "Aye, as well as grow the population. The area can sustain a lot more people than are currently living there. I have already spent parts of the wealth I accumulated in the war to send food towards the area. Those craftsmen that are already there will help to build shelters. This will help endear me to the population, and the men I have sent it with will start maintaining order there and get the minor nobles in the area to fall in line." He responded. He listened closely to the exchange. The development of the western coast was of much interest to all around this table, as it could shift the balance of power in the north away from them. "Who leads that mission?" Sir Willis Marndale asked. "Toghan Flint, I befriended him during the war. Afterwards, during the campaigns at the wall, he became a trusty companion of mine. Late Flint's youngest boy." The great Jon boomed, as he took a sip from his mug of ale. Jon nodded in affirmation. "Good lad that." Robert Glover praised him for his conduct whilst taking the twins. His father talked about him often as well and was glad he got some recognition later in the war. "The gods rest his soul." "Aye, he is. I have sent him to the area with 100 men my brother has lent me. I am planning on giving him lands in one of the 2 other spots." Jon replied. "Good idea. Any idea about the others you'll raise?" he asked his friend. "I am looking at a few Winterfell men, some clansmen too. Nothing has been decided yet." "How will you populate the area?" Smalljan asked. "In short, by importing northerners from all over. Farmers from Stark and Sewin lands for the fertile pastures, clansmen from the mountains and Wolfwood to populate the hills and woodlands, and fishermen from the Bight and the White Knife to settle the coastlines. Those will mingle with the local population and others." Jon explained. "Others? You mean the wilderling scum you captured?" Great Jon scoffed. "Partially yes, but those will remain a small minority and mostly consist of women and children." "Partially?" Sir Wylis asked. "Aye, we also have some of the women and small children we saved from the Ironborn, as well as the orphans brought from the south. Parts of them will be settled in the lands as well. Special care will be taken to spread them out and have them all intermarry. In 2 or 3 generations they will be as northern as can be. You have to remember that the local population will still outnumber any migrants 3 to 1, and the majority of those migrants will be loyal northerners too." He looked upon his friend in thought. "If you think it can be done, I believe you," he responded. This shocked the Umbers, whilst the Marndales and Hornwoods looked at him in thought. "You mentioned fishermen from the White Knife and the Bight. You intend to encourage people from my lands to move as well?" Lord Wyman asked. "I wanted to have a conversation with you about that. However, it would need to be private," Jon replied, piquing everyone's interest. "Very well, Wylis and I will come by your rooms tomorrow in the afternoon. We can discuss whatever you want then." Lord Wyman responded, a twinkle in his eye betraying that this talk would be about more than just a few hundred fishermen. "Back to the wildlings, Jon. What happened at the wall and how come you brought them south of it? I have only gotten vague reports. Lord Harley's asked. Well, once we got there, I had to spend a lot of time organizing the army present, especially the Skagasi. All men looked upon the table close to the wall where some 20 men were loudly shouting and drinking. They dressed weirdly and kept to themselves, but them all being here in Winterfell for the first time in over a century was curious enough. Once I had done that, I needed to help with the Night's Watch and we had to repel 2 probing attacks on different stretches of the wall. The second time I got an idea. Whilst some forces held them off in the west, I brought all our cavalry around to the east. We rode around in the haunted forest for days, but upon the set date we reached their army. They were unorganized and quickly routed between our riders from the east and north and the foot coming through the wall from the south side. Whatever some people may say, I am no wilderling lover. John said, looking intently at the Great Yon. We chased their scattered forces for days with the help of the Night's Watch. 10,000 of them died in the battle or the slaughters of the following days. 20,000 more were scattered to the winds with no food or shelter in the midst of winter. Many of them will never see summer again. On the 5th night, 3 wilderling chiefs snuck into my camp. Ghost caught them long before they reached my tent, but they hadn't come to kill me. Their leader told me he had come to swear allegiance to the Wolf King and to ask for safe harbor for his people. They had been ousted out of the army because of internal squabbles after the arrival of the Skagasi and the failure of their former chief, his uncle, to keep control of the war. The 3 clans they spoke for, some 1,500 people, asked for passage. They were mostly women and children, less than 200 males of fighting age remained. They were exhausted, malnourished and no threat. To my complete surprise the clan leaders kneeled down to swear their allegiance to me. They repeated it afterwards in front of a Heart 3 and swore oaths to Rob 2. All their people bowed too. Veteran men from the Night's Watch told me they had never seen or heard of the likes before. So, yes, I brought them south, but only them. All other captives were executed and scattered. We hunted them for about 100 miles north of the wall. I made sure that the wildlings wouldn't have any strength left to harass our lands and strengthened the Night's Watch. I did my duty to the north. I simply chose to help a small portion of those willing to submit. I will personally stand for them. Their clan leaders and elders have already personally sworn their oaths to Rob and they have all promised to have their children raised in my court and I am authorized to organize their future marriages. The unmarried men and women will marry into the local population in a great organized wedding. The children will have to do the same in a few years. The whole group will assimilate in the population in no time. They knelt in front of a weirwood. Harmond Umber asked. Aye, John replied. That means something, even to those pesky raiders. I caught some of them a year before the war. We hunted them until we came to a small weirwood grove on the edge of our lands. They had taken shelter there. They had destroyed fields, farmsteads and villages, but the grove was left intact. The gods are the only thing they care about. Harmond explained. Bah, what if they turn to raiding and kidnapping again once spring arrives? The Great Yon spat. Then I will personally execute each one that was involved. John responded grimly. This seemed to at least silence the Lord of Last Hearth. As it stands now, it diminishes the enemy's numbers even more whilst increasing my own. The wildlings are outnumbered by the locals 30 to 1 and thousands of northerners will still move into my lands the coming years. They will all be assimilated before my life is over. This placated most present at the table, so they talked about other things. As the night went on, he spent some time with the Mormonts and afterwards with the young Lord Timothy Flint. He participated in a drinking contest with those river lords who had made the journey north. Lord Blackwood passed out under the table. His brother Lord Lucas Goodwood left the hall in a drunken state with one of the female servants and Patrick Mallister and Sir Hugo Vance were seen emptying their bowels in the snow outside. He himself passed out at one point, after the Umber brothers joined in on the game. When he woke up with his head on the table, the bedding had already passed, and the hall was half empty. Rob still sat at the dais and was talking to Lord Wiman daily, but Ailey and Toss seemed to have left. He stood up and said his goodbyes to the friends in his vicinity and walked out. It was time for him to go to bed. 2 days later. Rob. He had more meetings planned with some of his lords this afternoon. He hadn't done much else this past week. However, he liked talking to his vassals. It gave him a much better understanding of his lands than those daily stacks of letters ever could. Yesterday evening, once everybody had recuperated from the wedding, he had had a talk with the Blackwood brothers about their views for the Riverlands. They seemed happy with his rule and had made suggestions for future infrastructure plans and integration projects. He in turn had helped them by giving them possible ideas on how to threat their 7 believing neighbors, and in Lucas' case his 7 believing minor vassals. This morning, he had a very interesting talk with Alyssane Mormont and her paramour Artos. First, her mother had joined them, but afterwards they had talked alone. 20 minutes in, he had already decided they would be perfect to rule the lands of the Stony Shore. When he had told them as much, they had been overjoyed. Together, they would create a new house name, sigil and words. Artos would take those as his when he ennobled him, before they left for Bear Island. There, they would wed in a normal wedding before her mother's people. Together they would carry the name of this new house and set sail for the Stony Shore. He had given them his permission to start on the groundwork to build a wooden keep there. In the meantime, they would need to entice people from Bear Island and the northern mountain clans to move south towards their new lands. They would need to think about enlarging the population, raising minor nobles and winning the loyalty of the local people and minor nobles. Once it had become clear to both that he would legitimize their 2 children, they had been overjoyed. Artos himself had sworn his loyalty to him about a dozen times during the conversation. He had advised them to betroth their 9-year-old daughter to one of the strongest local houses, whilst finding a younger daughter or cousin from a large noble house to help establishing their new house among their peers. Now, he had 2 important talks ahead of him. First with Lord Mondale and afterwards with Lady Dustin. He searched in his desk for some of the papers that could help him during the conversation, and by the time he had found them Lord Wiman had arrived. He was let in by one of his guards and took his seat after being offered a glass of Arbor Gold. The fat Lord of White Harbour looked to be in an especially good mood. He had a sneaking suspicion for the reason behind that. "Good afternoon, Your Grace. I once mentioned the idea of creating our own coinage to get rid of some more of the Targaryen legacy in our lands. I think now would be a great way to start with this. The lands are at peace and during winter a lot less trading happens. By the time the traffic picks up again in spring, we could have tens of thousands of coins ready for circulation." He looked upon one of his older and most powerful vassals. He knew that by agreeing to it, he would further grow House Mondale's influence. They would become the only mint in his kingdom and would be the first to use the new coinage. Nevertheless, it was a very good idea. He kept his face neutral, whilst responding. "I suspect that you have some ideas yourself." Your Grace, I do. Personally, I would keep the gold values of the old system in place. They can always be replaced in the future, but for now keeping them would help trade both with the rest of Westeros and the free cities. The old values are well known and are a trusted variable when trading. He nodded in agreement. The North was the richest it had ever been now, no need to devalue their currency. For the designs, I worked out some ideas. He pulled out a few coins from his pocket. The first one was a gold coin, on it was a running direwolf. This one would replace the golden dragons. It would clearly establish House Stark's legitimacy. It would also help your reign personally. The Lord of White Harbour explained, as he turned the coin around. When he looked upon the other side of the coin, he saw himself. A delicate design showed his face looking directly at the user. His beard was cropped neatly, and his bronze and iron crown adorned his head. Above his picture, his name was engraved in a simple yet elegant hand. He picked it up and turned it around in the palm of his hand. "It's beautiful," he mumbled to himself. Lord Wiman grinned proudly. "I am glad you like it, Your Grace. House Mondale and I wish only the best for your reign. We propose to rework your personal design every decade, to keep up with your changing appearance. Special coins can also be minted for the birth of your heir. However, this one will set the precedent of all those to follow, for you and your descendants." He thought those ideas over and nodded approvingly. "This will do nicely, Lord Wiman. You have my thanks. What else do you have there?" he replied, as he looked upon the other coins he had pulled out of his pocket. It was more difficult to find designs for the silver and copper coins. I made multiple models for you to choose from. First off, we have the silver coins. He spoke, as he showed him 3 silver coins. The first one had the same likeness of his face, whilst his name was engraved in the same way. On the other side, instead of a running direwolf, a trout was engraved. This is to signify the importance of the Riverlands and your overlordship over them and House Tully. The next silver coin had the same trout design, but instead of simply him it showed a portrait of him and Alis together. This could be a way to celebrate your union together, your grace. Lord Wyman pointed out, before giving him a third coin. This one showed a split sigil of a direwolf and trout on one side and a map of the kingdom on the other. He looked upon all 3 of them. He discarded the last one. Borders would probably change from time to time during his descendants' reign. Having them fixed on coins in everyday use could pose problems for them. Besides, having the Tully trout on equal terms as the Stark direwolf was asking for disaster. I think the first design is best. He summarized, after a short while. However, keep the idea of the portrait of Alis and I. It would be a good idea to celebrate certain wedding anniversaries. Certainly, your grace. Lastly, we have the more difficult ones, the copper coins. For now, I have only made designs for the stars. Groats, half-groats, pennies and halfpennies will have to be for later. They would also be much more difficult to get out of circulation in the short term. His warden of the White Knife explained to him, as he presented him with a few copper stars. The first had the same design it had always had of the 7-pointed star on one side, with a carved weirwood on the other. It bore a regal and majestic face, as if daring anyone to challenge its existence on the coin. Another one simply bore the weirwood tree with on the other side a picture of his face in profile. In the next one, the weirwood tree and 7-pointed star were morphed together with the same image of him on the other side. Lastly, there was simply the original 7-pointed star with his image in profile and name on the other side. He looked upon the designs and wasn't sure what to choose. The design without the 7-pointed star would anger most of his subjects in the Riverlands. Keeping the original, whilst simply changing Robert Baratheon's face for his would annoy most of the Northerners. He didn't know what to pick exactly. Can I keep these? I am in the process of appointing my council and I would like to ask them all for their input on this subject. However, you can start producing the gold and silver designs. How soon can you start? Immediately, your grace. I have prepared for this day and the old mint is in perfect condition to start producing. His vassal smiled wildly. Very well, please do so. However, in time things will need to be looked at by the council. Normally it was the master of coin who decided upon the minting of coins, exchange rates and the appointments of the officers of the mints. This will remain in the hands of a council official in the future. You can start production now, but it is not your authority to oversee things or promote overseers. The old mint in White Harbor will remain active, with all the known advantages for your lands, but authority is mine and my appointed council alone. He pointed out to Lord Wyman. The Lord of White Harbor's face didn't change. Of course, your grace, we simply serve at your leisure. Have you had thought about any more of the appointments on your council? He stroked his beard before thinking about answering. The composition of his council had been something that he had been considering for a long time, although he hadn't made many of them official yet. John had been officially made his hand of the king, whilst Uncle Bryndon had been made commander of the King's Guard. He knew that most of his vassals were trying to work towards a position during these festive weeks, but he hadn't announced anything yet. However, now was as good a time as any. As a matter of fact, I have. Although I have a little bit of a conundrum for you. First off, I thought you would be the perfect choice to be my first master of ships. However, I know that you also have a great spy network at your disposal and would serve adequately as master of whisperers. Nevertheless, it is impossible to have you serve as both. What are your thoughts about that? His gamble had paid off, as he saw how he took Lord Marndale entirely by surprise. The older man was silent for a while, before answering. I would be honored to serve on your council, your grace. I am willing to help you set up a spy network and using my connections to help you in these endeavors, but I think my and my family's expertise remains with the fleet. I think I could best serve you in the position of master of ships. With difficulty, he kept his face neutral. This was the answer he had hoped for. No one would dare to contest that Lord Marndale was the ideal candidate for the position, but this way he would be able to use his extensive intelligence network too. That sounds perfect, Lord Wiman. I will be announcing most of my new council at the dinner feast in 3 days. I ask you to keep this quiet until then. He replied. Of course, Your Grace. Could you already shine a light on who my colleagues might be? John will remain my hand, whilst my uncle Bryndon will have a seat as Lord Commander. Osric Carstark will be made Master of the Treasury, an office that will replace the Master of Coin. Mayor Stilowin will also take a seat at the council. I am still looking into a Master of Whisperers, a Master of Law, and I am planning to instigate some other offices as well. More on that will become clear at our first meeting. On top of that, other nobles from across the kingdom will serve as advisors too. Lord Wiman nodded in thought. Thank you for the information, Your Grace. I look forward to it. Now, on the topic of John. I have heard that he has had a talk with you and Willis yesterday. He asked with a small smile on his face. He already knew what had been talked about there, as John had come to him straight afterwards, but he wanted to hear it from Marndale himself. The Lord smiled lightly. He did. It was a very fruitful discussion, Your Grace. Is that so? He simply replied, not able to hold his own smile in. Quite. Lord Wiman smiled. However, I believe that you already know as much. I am happy with the outcome. The negotiations were very beneficial for both sides. John is a good man and has a bright future, and Wyler will be happy with him. It is the best for her and our house. He smiled at that. John had fostered with Lord Wiman's late son Sir Wendell. He had gotten to know the late knight's niece well. Both from their time there and their shared time in Winterfell, for when she fostered here. Where he had first simply been a bastard, now he was a lord in his own right and hand of the king on top of that. A marriage with him would vastly increase the Marndale influence in Winterfell the next few decades, whilst it would legitimize John's new house with a marriage to one of the strongest in the north. It also had another function. He had noticed the growing alliance centered around the Umbers. The Carstarks were already directly connected to him, thereby overlapping both alliances. With John's marriage, the same could be said for the Marndales now. This ensured the integration of the Umber alliance in his web of stability, instead of it being a hindrance to it. What about the deal with the population transfer? He asked. I agreed to send up to 2,000 people his way. The vast majority will be either fishermen from the White Knife and the Bite or sailors and rowers on ships. I will take a look if I can spare some small shipbuilders. That way, he can start establishing and manning a small fishing fleet spread out across his lands. His other demands will make this more challenging, but I'll see what I can do. The other demands meaning the religious considerations. Those yes. I don't fully agree with it, but I understand where he's coming from. Mixing wildlings, people held hostage by Ironborn for a decade, clansmen and other northerners in a very spread out local population won't be easy as it is. Mixing religious differences into that would make things harder. However, refusing any 7 believers in his land seems quite harsh. He nodded silently. However, unlike what most of the people think, I still have more old gods believers in my lands than 7 believers. My ancestors only left the Reach with some 1,500 people when they came to the north. For over 1,000 years we have intermingled with the sons and daughters of the first men. Our blood is as much theirs as can be said the rest of the north, even if that isn't always the case with our customs. I know that, and you will never hear anything different from my mouth. He replied. Marndale looked pleased with the answer. However, I don't know the specific distribution of both groups. Could you help enlighten me on that? He asked his vassal. Some 80% of the 30,000 inhabitants of White Harbor believe in the 7. The other 20% are mostly sailors and fishermen or their descendants that have come to the city in the last 5 to 10 generations or so. Most families integrate and intermarry if they stay longer than that, although there are some old exceptions. He started explaining. In my lands around the city things are very different. The closer to the city, the more seven believers. The closest farmsteads, hamlets and villages are predominantly Andal in custom and belief, although even there it is less than in the city center. The further you go from our seat, the more the influence of the seven lessons. Whilst smaller towns and larger villages often have some presence, most hamlets or fishing villages 30 miles from White Harbour have none. I have well over 200,000 people in all my lands together, maybe close to 250,000. Of those, I don't think more than 60,000 believe in the seven. Both religions are much less zealous, as they come into contact and even intermarry with each other often. He listened attentively and made mental notes on the information. So, it wouldn't be too much of a problem to find people for him. I will certainly find a few hundred fishermen willing to join on the edges of my lands. Those will be almost certainly believers of the old gods. Sailors and especially shipbuilders will be more difficult to find, but I'll do what I can. I told John as much. If he were to need farmers or miners, I could help him with that more easily. Miners? He asked. We have some silver mines on the fringes of our territory. If anything worth of value is found on Sea Dragon Point in the next 2 or 3 decades or so, we could help John with the start of some basic excavations and the training of a workforce for the mines. That's very generous of you, Lord Wyman. I thank you for it. He responded honestly. Well, John will be my family too soon. That's what family does, they help each other when they can. His eyes glinted and it was clear that he would ask something back from John if it was in his power. Still, it could be a massive boon. First, John would need to focus on setting up a fishing and farming population to help feed his growing population and invest in infrastructure and trade. However, once that had been done, some natural resources would come in handy for both his house and local trade in the area. The region hadn't been thoroughly studied in a millennium. Maybe finding something, however small, wouldn't be out of the order. Would your offer of miners also extend to other houses in the north? It could better the future of the north significantly. He asked. That is different, Your Grace. You have to acknowledge that I would be disadvantaging my own house then. Unless you talk about silver deposits close to the White Knife or the Narrow Sea, it wouldn't profit our silversmiths and just make others richer. His vassal explained diplomatically. Of course, I was just asking. I have no knowledge of other deposits at this moment anyway, so it is a moot point. I think this was everything I had to talk about for the moment. We will talk in a few days in your new position of Master of Ships. If you could prepare everything you know about our naval position, you would have my thanks. He finalized the conversation. Our position in White Harbour, the north or the entire kingdom? His Master of Ships asked. Everything you can get me. He smiled and the man nodded. He bowed slightly, not an easy feat with so large a belly, and left his solar. He then spent the next half an hour organizing his documents and preparing himself for the next meeting. When Lady Dustin arrived, she took a seat even before he could offer it to her. Her eyes pierced into his. He knew she wasn't excited about the discussion they were about to have, but it was nonetheless necessary. He looked up at her and found no reason to beat around the bush. The Dustin succession, he voiced aloud. She scoffed. You want me gone, that's about it. No, it's not. On the contrary, whatever we discuss here today, I plan to allow you to retain the Barrowlands until you're dead. He countered. This got her attention. Truly. I thought you meant to install some Dustin cousin to get rid of me and my influence. No, not at all. I want to prevent unrest breaking out when you die. There are 5 distant branches of House Dustin alive, some with multiple claimants. If you should die without appointing an heir, most of them will try to claim the seat at Barrow Hall. They all have connections to the local nobility and funds of their own. There would be fighting in the streets of Barrowton and on the barrows outside of it. He explained, pausing for effect. At the same time, neighboring houses like the Tall Hearts, Sawins or your brother's family will try to assert their influence. The result would be chaos and the people of the Barrowlands will suffer, whilst trade and agricultural production in the region will diminish. This will in turn hurt the rest of the north. I cannot let that happen, nor do I think you would wish it upon your people. He continued, and he honestly meant his reply. You are right about that. I do not. She agreed. What do you propose? Well, of the 5 Dustin branches, there are only 3 somewhat legitimate candidates. The others are too far in the line of succession to reasonably consider. If you simply look at their descent, the obvious candidate is Benjicott Dustin. He started. Lady Barbary was deep in thought. He was one of my infantry captains during the war. Benji just married into one of the local houses a few months back. His father tried to claim my position once. There has always been a strained relation with his house since. He nodded. However, he is alone now. His brother and cousin died in the war and he has no children as of yet. The second in the line of succession is Roderick Dustin. He has 2 sons of his own, ensuring the continuation of his claim. Aside from his male line Dustin descent, he is of implacable lineage on his mother's side. This includes houses Stark, Carstark and Flint with other relations to houses Slate and Stout. One of Domeric's cavalry captains, my nephew spoke highly of him. I looked into him after the war. He also has relations with small local nobles like the Grey Barrows and the Hornblowers. He owns several businesses in Barrow Hall and is the owner and employer of several trade carts and wandering traders in Dustin, Riswell, Tall Heart and Flint lands. He nodded once again, glad that she had also done her homework. Both of those were 4th cousins. There is another 5th cousin named Byrne. Yes, I know him. He has been one of my trusted advisors for over a decade. However, he is old. 20 years my senior. Appointing him as my heir would only serve to get his son or even grandson on the throne. Sadly, they are made of inferior stock than their father. It probably has something to do with the wife the man chose all those years ago. She was a complete pest to deal with. They are much the same. He smiled at that. Aside from that, there is also one line of bastard descent. Their leader was only a 3rd cousin to the late Lord William, so he could claim closeness in blood. Mark Twoakes. No, I will not have it. That man is a complete menace to everything and everyone around him. I will not have it. She replied decisively. As you say, he is off the table then. That leaves us with 3 candidates. I have a proposal for you who to choose. He started to explain his plan. Lady Barbary simply cocked her eyebrow, signaling him to continue. I have gotten to know Roderick Dustin during the campaign in the south, on the recommendation of Domeric actually. He is loyal, capable and he is a distant relation to me. However, he also gives other possibilities. He has 2 underaged sons. Both could be raised in your court. You could bestow honors upon them and mold them into capable rulers of the Barrowlands, whilst appointing their father as your heir. Chances Roderick will never rule in his own right, but that his son will succeed him. Roderick is also deeply rooted in the local trade network, as you said. It would be hugely beneficial for my plans if he came to prominence. I talked to him multiple times since the war. He actually accompanied me here, something about trade with Wintertown. He seems reasonable enough. Hypothetically, how would the arrangement look in your eyes? She asked him. I know he's here. I personally arranged for a trade opportunity that he couldn't afford to miss so he would be close by. He smirked. This took Lady Barbary by surprise and he saw how she looked at him differently. If that's true, you have more cunning in you than your father ever had. She surmised. My father taught me most I know of ruling, family and warfare, but I did have other teachers as well. He simply replied, which she seemed to accept. If he accepts, his sons would be sent to Barrow Hall to be taught under you. You would bestow honors upon them and Roderick himself and proclaim his line your heirs for all your vassals to hear. You will assign him and some of his companions to offices within the Barrowlands, whilst you retain complete control of the decision-making and ruling. They would simply serve in certain roles or as advisors. I would also propose you give him access to a small budget. That way he can buy himself some better armor and clothing to suit his position. He could also buy the loyalty of certain people that are necessary for the transition in a few decades. That could work. However, how would you deal with the other claimants? On that topic I would count on your expertise. You know these men far better than I ever could. He put the ball in her court. She took her time to answer but seemed to appreciate this. Byrne and his brood can be bought off with gifts and offices, I think. Byrne never tried to exert himself as a possible heir to House Dustin, neither did he instill this to his sons or grandsons. The other more distant branches could be too, if necessary. Benjicott and Twoakes will be serious problems. Benjicott will never let it stand that someone with a weaker claim than his rises in power instead of him. Mark Twoakes and his brood are only one level above brigands. They will do everything possible if they see a way to advance their fortunes. She summarized the situation in her lands. What action do you propose to smoothen the ascension of Roderick or his son William? He asked her. What I will propose won't be honorable, but I think it will have to be done. Benjicott or his future children will never stop claiming the Barrowlands if nothing is done. He has excellent relations with 10 to 20% of my vassals. Most of those vassals can be placated, but only if he disappears. She voiced, looking intently at him. If he disappears. He cocked his own eyebrow this time. He will either need to die or be sent to the Night's Watch. Preferably before his wife gets pregnant. Otherwise Roderick's succession will always be messy. She answered his question. The wall it is then. I will not have a man murdered for this. He sighed. This were the parts of ruling that he hated in his core. However, this decision could save the lives of thousands in a few years. What about Twoakes? Mark isn't the only problem there. He has multiple younger brothers and cousins. Many of them who have their own children. However, their ilk isn't well liked in my lands. His only useful relations are wealthy charlatans and nobles with dubious morals, but they will pose trouble. They are too smart to directly oppose my rule, but I wouldn't put it past them to try to abduct Roderick or his children to get them out of the way. He looked at her in shock. Could you organize an escort of guards for them from now on? Of course, I will put only trusted men on it. However, that won't solve the problem. These men have been circling my rule for almost 2 decades. If I were to die, they will stop at nothing. She explained the situation, which was much graver than he had initially thought. I would ask you to discredit their family the coming months and years. Try to alienate them even more from the rest of the nobility. If any of them were to do any shady dealings, punish them harshly. Send some of them to the wall, if at all possible. Have others leave your lands. Maybe we could award some of the less dubious figures with knighthoods and minor lands in the south to pull their clan apart. He thought aloud. That could work. I will give you a list with 3 or 4 names of male or female line relations to Twoakes. Be sure to award them with lands that are spread out far enough. You don't want to create the same problem there that they pose here. She advised him. He nodded and took notes of that. Now I want to talk to you about my council. What of it? She asked suspiciously. I would want to offer House Dustin a place in it. He replied matter-of-factly. You would offer a woman a seat at your council? She asked, clearly not trusting his words. No, I would offer a seat to the head of House Dustin. He countered. She looked at him in thought. You will make an interesting ruler, Your Grace. In what capacity would you see this? You would get an advisory seat at the table. I plan to make a lot of investments in the western side of the north. It is only logical that it should be represented in the center of the decision-making. He answered. Fair enough, but why me? You have far better relations with the Mormonts or Glovers than with me. Your own brother just received Sea Dragon Point and is Hand of the King. He could represent it. She countered. John's lands are underdeveloped and will be for some time. He will have more than enough work with those in combination with his work as Hand. The Glovers and Mormonts are important and well respected, but their lands do not hold the significance in trade that Barrowton does. I plan to expand its importance as a regional trading hub for all northern houses along the western coast, as well as trade with the Iron Islands and Seaguard. I even negotiated direct access to it for the Lannisters and Hightowers. No, you are by far the best positioned for the role. Something glinted in her eyes. For one of the first times ever, he saw Barbary Dustin smile. Then I will gladly accept your offer. House Dustin is honored with both the recognition, as well as the trading opportunities. You will receive even more honors. If you agree to it, I would like to raise Roderick Dustin to my council as well. This clearly surprised her. In what capacity? I would name him Master of Infrastructure. A new position that will oversee the construction of infrastructure to benefit trade and our overall defenses. He personally knows the infrastructure and trade routes in the southwest of the north better than any noble. He has been to the riverlands and has seen all those lands during and after the war. He knows their weaknesses and what needs to be done. His job will be to stimulate the development of roads, villages, towns and internal trade routes in regions where we find them lacking. As I said, the focus will be on the western part of the north, but also the southern riverlands for now. In the future, this may change. You think him capable of this? She asked him. I do. I had multiple conversations with him. He does his work ably in war, but it is clear that peace is where he thrives. This will also legitimize him as your heir by the kingdom, as he will travel through it from time to time. It would also make it so that 2 of your counselors are Dustins. She pointed out. It will, but that will be the way of things. Other houses will have to live with that. He countered. She smirked once again. Then I will agree, on one condition. Which is? He asked. Roderick's son William will have to marry my cousin's daughter Barbary Riswell. She is my protege and I am quite fond of her. Another marriage between a William Dustin and a Barbary Dustin, kind of poetic, don't you think? I accept. He immediately replied. I wish them all the luck in life that their namesakes were denied. Barbary Dustin looked at him severely. As do I, Your Grace, as do I. Chapter 73, Managing a Growing Family. 304 AC. A time jump of around 16 months occurs between this and last chapter. John. He sat at the dais on the place of honor to Rob's right. His wife Wyler sat next to him. His wife. They had married 8 months ago in Winterfell. He had wanted it to be a small affair, but that sadly hadn't worked out. Rob had planned it so that the wedding could be held after his return from the war. The Marndalis had joined his brother on his way south after the marriages of Harryon and Smalljan in last Hearth. Many others had joined them, notably many members of the clans that had fought under him 2 years ago and even a few sons of the Skagasi. The singers and poets were already calling it the year of the weddings. The cream of the northern nobility had attended weddings in Winterfell, White Harbour, last Hearth and Winterfell again. The problem with weddings was that it was an excellent way to socialize and find yourself a bride. This had led to the paradoxical phenomenon his friends had come to start calling the wedding effect. Weddings always led to more weddings. For 8 months it had been quiet, and no weddings of great lords or heirs were planned in the north for the next year. Yet, they had once again gotten a new reason to come together and celebrate. It was an even more joyous occasion now and much of the realm had come together for it. He leaned back on his chair and looked behind Rob's back to see little Ricard sleeping in Alis' arms. Rob had had a son and the kingdom had received their much-awaited heir. By now, the babe was already 6 months old and he knew him well, but for most of the nobles it was the first time seeing their future king. He was a healthy boy with very healthy lungs. At the beginning of the feast, Rob had ceremoniously raised him in front of everyone to see. Many had whistled and screamed in support, which had led to the baby boy crying loudly. Lord Brandon Norrie had immediately shouted, if the boy screams as well on the battlefield as he does in his father's arms, then he will be a great commander of men indeed. This had led many to bang their mugs of ale on the table. It had been a horrendously loud noise, but Rob had simply smiled and agreed with Norrie, whilst protectively holding his son close to his chest. Every one of his siblings doted upon him and his sister, and who could blame them? He looked a lot like Lord Eddard, with a longer face and grey eyes, but the hair upon his head was not the same colour brown. It had a reddish tint to it that was unmistakably Rob's. It was less outspoken with little Ricard, but it was still there. Rob had named his son after his late father-in-law, as well as their own late grandfather. A true Stark name, all the nobles had agreed. Lord Wyman and Lord Riswell, who had known his grandfather quite well, had even mentioned how proud the man would have been. Little Ricard was the first crown prince of an independent north in 300 years, he would have been honoured to have him named after him, or so they said. As always, the occasion was more than just a simple celebration. Lords used it to mingle and talk about the political situation in the realm. As Hand of the King, he was in the middle of all of these discussions. In contrast to the northern weddings, many Riverlanders had made it north this time. Lord Bryndon Blackwood had made it to Winterfell once again, after having recently had the joy of celebrating the birth of his own heir. His brother, his good friend Lucas, had had to stay home due to problems with some old Goodbrook loyalists. Lord Jason Mallister was here, and Robb had seen it fit make him his Master of Laws. He had been a great addition to their council these last 3 weeks. Lord Jason would be staying with them for a while, as Patrek had gotten the responsibility to rule over Seaguard from his father. Lord Edmure couldn't be there as the Riverlands were still recovering from the war, but House Tully was always represented by Sir Bryndon. Lord Edmure's new brother-in-law, Hendry Bracken, had made the trip as representative for his uncle and father-in-law Lord John O's Bracken. Sir Halman Peage, the Knight of Fairmarket, had made the trip with his new son-in-law Roderick Sumber, the Great Jon's younger brother and lord of the former area of King's Landing. During the last few years, he had built his own wooden keep on Rhaenyra's Hill, calling it the Last Castle. A clear nod to his former home, as well as it being the southern border of the kingdom. The city itself had been renamed Riverport, another nod to its border status, as it was located by the Blackwater Rush and the new gateway to the Riverlands. Other notable attendees from the Riverlands were Lords Daniel Deddings, Lothar Mallory, Edwin Terrick, Hugo Greenseamp, the new name Hugo Vance had taken on after being given his lordship, and Sir Rupert Brune. They were accompanied by many friends, cousins and other companions, and many of the absent houses had also sent minor relatives with escorts. The great hall was packed to the brim with people from all over the new kingdom. "How are you finding your new lands, John?" Domeric asked him. "Is the progress going well?" He looked upon the Lord of the Dread Fort and smiled. "Aye, it is. I have scouted out the position on which I will build my future keep. It is on the western side of the peninsula, at the end of a small bay that serves as a natural harbour. There is an old, but small, village located near the harbour that will soon be expanded into a sturdy town focused on trading and fishing. I am in the process of locating and gathering the resources to start construction on both the keep and the town. The actual construction will begin in spring, which the Maesters believe will only be a few months from now. Let's pray to the gods that they are right. The end of winter is always a joyous occasion." Harry on interjected. As uncle to little Ricard, he had also been given a place at the high table this time. Domeric nodded in agreement. "What about the wildlings? How is that going? How did they react to your rule when you were on your lands?" It wasn't the first time that he had to answer that question this past week. "It's going well, considering the circumstances. Most are following their oaths and are integrating well. The mixed marriages have been a resounding success, and a new great event is planned for spring which will include the women saved from the Ironborn, who are currently staying in Wintertown or Barrowton, and more wildlings with men from all over the north." "You said most are following their oaths?" Harry cocked his eyebrow. "Aye, a handful of men and former spearwives have made some trouble. Most of them were strung up from the trees in the areas where they had made their offences. Their valuables have been distributed amongst those of their families that remained loyal as well as those they had grieved," he replied, for which both men gave him praise. "How have the locals reacted to your appointment? Your arrival means parting with centuries-old autonomy for most of them." Domeric inquired. "There weren't too many problems. I had to win some of them over, whilst most just wanted to be reaffirmed in the territories they held. Most were overjoyed when they heard the ideas about enriching the area. A dozen requests have come in to send immigrants their way, and all local houses have started looking into increasing their production in timber, hides and fur for trade by the time summer arrives. There was even one intelligent vassal that laid out his plans to invest into the pottery businesses, as future trade will need it for transport. In the end, they all paid homage to me." "Sounds good." Both men responded. They both knew what it was to have to win over the local populations. Didn't they feel threatened by all the new arrivals? "You mentioned before that you will raise new bannermen." "Aye, that's true. I have already raised 7 new ones. Most them will only rule over small amounts of lands and people, a village or even just 2 or 3 hamlets and some farmsteads. They are spread out over the territory, and 6 more will be raised in the next year. Lands for that have already been identified," he explained to the approval of the lords sitting around him. 2 exceptions have been made. These two have gotten bigger and more important lands. Firstly, there is Toggan Flint, who got lands on the top of the peninsula. A small village already exists there, and I have arranged a marriage between him and the heiress of the lands, which I have then expanded for him. The village will be greatly enlarged, and efforts are being made to stimulate a lot of fishing in the bay. Secondly, there is an officer of the Winterfell Guard whom I have known for over a decade now. He has been given lands on the border with the Glovers. A lot of migration will be steered towards the area to promote the lumber industry and some small farming. His two small children are already promised to neighboring local houses. All in all, integration is going smoothly. How goes the development of your house? Harry asked. Wyler smiled next to him and nudged him to tell them. I have chosen the name Whitefy, both as a nudge to the Targaryen history and a break from it. My house words will be an oath given, to symbolize the break even more. We have given our oaths to the Starks of Winterfell and we will keep those no matter what. He explained. A noble thing to do. It will ease those lords that might still doubt your loyalty in the south. Domeric agreed. Have you chosen a sigil? I have. A white dragon and white direwolf on a black field. Both trying to catch each other's tail without succeeding to again showcase my ancestry. I am both a dragon and a wolf and I have to see a way to combine the two without one destroying the other entirely. My keep will be called Dragon's Lair. It seemed fitting, seeing that it is located on Sea Dragon Point. Both men seemed to accept all of this, which was a good sign. Besides Robb and Wyler, they were the first ones to hear about it. John Whitefy, Dom mused. I like it. He grinned and he felt a weight falling off his shoulders, which he hadn't even known was there. As do I. Wyler mentioned from next to him. He looked over to her and she smiled at him. He looked into her pale blue eyes and wondered how things had come to be this way. Never in all his time fostering for her uncle had he expected anything to be possible between them. Now here they were, man and wife. The last few months had been good to them. They both respected and appreciated each other. He wouldn't say it was love on his part just yet, but he thought it entirely possible that it could grow to such heights in time. His friends saw their looks and laughed. When I see you two looking, I expect that there will soon be some more Whitefys to appreciate. Harry quipped and Dom laughed loudly. Both he and Wyler blushed, as his wife suddenly looked away from him, which only encouraged his friends' laughter. It was true that things in the bedroom had been a lot more pleasurable than he had expected. Wyler was beautiful. She had stopped dyeing her long blonde hair green and her curves had grown considerably in the years that he had spent in the south. She looked almost regal when she put some effort in her appearance, but most of the time she didn't. She could be found in the kitchens, stables or the courtyard much more often than doing embroidery, but that was fine by him. We hope to be expecting soon. He answered diplomatically, before turning towards them again. However, it is I who should ask you two of these things, isn't it? He grinned back. His friends laughed. It is. Being a father, it is a weird feeling. I can't describe it. Serena is with Edric in Carhold now. He is much too young to travel. However, I hope he and young Ricard can be great friends. They are only a few months apart and Edric will be fostering in Winterfell when he is older. Harry spoke, a fulfilled smile on his face. For me it is much the same. Dom replied, as he looked to the seat next to him. Sansa felt their gaze upon her and smiled. She protectively put a hand over the small, but visible, bulge on her belly. He smiled back at his sister. He knew that she had always wanted a family. The news of her being pregnant only a few months after Aelys had overjoyed the whole family. If it is a boy, he will also be fostering here with yours. Dom mentioned to Harry. If it is a girl, I will keep him as far away from your ilk as I possibly could. He quipped amicably. Ha ha, I understand. A woman with your delicate complexion wouldn't be able to handle any son of mine. He boomed and they all shared in the laughter. Wyler and Sansa continued on with their own conversation, while they talked of lighter things. Sir Brynden Tully. He was standing guard behind Robb's table, as was his job as the head of his Kingsguard. The job suited him better than he had initially thought. He got to spend lots of time with Kat and all her children and even her 2 grandchildren. Both were adorable and his guard duties with Edda often consisted of playing with her. She called him Unsie Binden. Little Ricard was a lovely sweet baby boy. He was healthy and laughed a lot, just like his father when he was little. Kat had entrusted upon him. He had a healthy pair of lungs, especially when he was hungry. Both him and his sister looked mostly stark and cast-dark, but the little boy's hair was unmistakably red. Hoster's first great-grandson had his hair. If his brother had been alive, he would have smiled. However, he might even be happier knowing that down in Riverrun another Hoster Tully had been born, a little red-haired boy named after his late grandfather. He couldn't wait to meet that other boy too, and Rob had entrusted to him that he planned on fostering him in the future with little Ricard. So even if he missed much of the boy's early childhood, he would see him grow up after that. Rob would also visit the Riverlands again in spring, and he would make sure to accompany him on the journey. The formal part of the feast had long finished. Some Northmen were running around, others were shouting loudly, and the first drinking contests were on the way. Alice asked Rob if she could put Ricard to bed so she could mingle among some of the ladies as well, but Rob refused. He needs to be seen by the lords a little longer. I need to talk with some of the nobles tonight, and I want him near me. He symbolizes the North's future, and they need to remember that. Although his queen agreed to all of this, she still wanted to go and mingle with some of her old friends and acquaintances. Rob looked around and smiled a mischievous smile at him. "Uncle, could you take care of Ricard for a while? I need to have my hands free to guard you, your grace." He replied matter-of-factly. "I am only the present of the kingdom, uncle. Ricard here is the future. He is much more important. What better way to guard him than to be able to carry him away in the face of danger?" Rob winked at him and he sighed. He knew Hoster's grandson well enough to know there would be no changing his mind if he showed him that cocksure grin. Alice handed him her son with a knowing smile on her face, before darting off towards the table where Winifred Mandaly, Lyra Umber and a few clanswomen were sitting with many of their vassals' daughters. He looked at the little boy sleeping in his arm. He had turned a little at being changed from his mother's warm arms into his, but had already found his place snuggled in his grey tabard. Another one of Rob's inventions, the King's Guard were now dressed in light grey instead of white. It didn't matter too much to him, they both stained as easily when having dinner. Rob didn't have to wait long before one of his vassals came over. Alysanne walked up together with her husband. They had taken a new house name together, he remembered. They were now the leading couple of House Shield and officially ruled over Stony Shore. Their words seemed accurate. "We guard the shore." It was practical and had a nice ring to it. He looked over the hall for any possible threats whilst rocking little Ricard back and forth slowly. He used the rhythm of the first song that popped into his head, "The Miller's Wench." It was an old soldier's tune from the Riverlands that he had learned whilst fighting in the War of the Ninepenny Kings. From time to time, he focused back on Rob's conversation with the Shields. Your Grace," he heard Mage's second daughter say. "We brought 434 people with us from Bear Island. A few more might cross in the future, but they will form the core of the population of our keep and the neighboring village we will create. They mostly consist of workers, maids, fishermen and guards and their families, with a few craftsmen looking for business opportunities mixed in. Most of Arto's family has also joined us, some of which will be granted land upon our arrival there." "Very well," their young king replied. "I have successfully made a deal with 5 northern mountain clans in your name. If you wish it, they will send some of their own towards your land as well. Each clan wants one of their own to be granted some minor lands, and they will populate it with some 60 to 100 of their people depending on the size of the clan." The couple looked happy with it, he saw from the corner of his eye, as baby Ricard managed to take a hold of his tabard whilst sleeping. He twisted and wrinkled it until he held parts of it like a blanket around his little chest. "A few hundred of the former Iron-born women and children will join you from Wintertown and Barrowton too. If you wish it, I can have those that are here accompany you when you leave Winterfell. I will make sure they are provisioned for the trip." Rob continued. "We would very much appreciate it, Your Grace." Arto's Shield replied. Rob nodded and started talking about their plans to build their wooden keep. Both the location and design were discussed, but he couldn't hear all of it as he was watching the room for possible threats whilst slowly rocking the baby in his arms. A few minutes later, the shields left, but not before throwing loving glances towards the baby he was carrying in his arms. Rob awarded him with another one of his cocky smiles, but he paid it no mind. Once they were alone, he would get his grandnephew back. Whilst they were in public, it was his job to protect him and strengthen his reign and his image, which he would do now. Once it was just the two of them, he would put the royal brat in his place. The next guest that came up to Rob was a representative from the Night's Watch. Their choice of representative had been a clever one, he thought, as Duncan Big Little walked up towards the dais from the table where he had been sitting with his brother. Little was the new first ranger, and as such a very high member of the watch. On top of that, he was also northern to the core, which ended him and the watch to the Northmen here, with Rob maybe amongst them. "I first wish to thank you again for reviving our order, King Rob." The former clansman started off. The Night's Watch once again numbers over 2,500 strong, and 3 castles have been resettled with a 4th planned at the start of spring. He could see sincere gratitude in the man's eyes and deemed him to be no threat quickly. He looked across the room and locked eyes with his new brother, who smirked at the sight of him holding the crown prince of the kingdom. Harmon Turrell had been the former captain of the guards of Carhold. He had protected Rob during much of his fosterage there, and the man had agreed to leave his home and join his king's guard after the death of his second wife. He got along with him well. They were 2 older men in a world made by and for the young ones. He thought about the order they were creating, as he scanned the room. Many had started calling it the Wolf's Guard now. It was much like the Targaryen's King's Guard had been, but still notably different. Apart from their great abbot, they would number 10 people. No emphasis was placed on its members being knights, as long as they were great fighters. Rob had entrusted upon him that they shouldn't discard baseborn or common men with exceptional skills either. Another change had been the decree that most senior members of the Stark family would receive their own personal shields, as threats against them weren't unthinkable with all the enemies they had made in the south. They would always be accompanied by them on outings or during feasts and festive times, with lots of strangers staying at the castle. For now, their numbers had grown to include 6 members. Aside from him and Turrell, there was the king's brother-in-law Torrin Karstark. Although young and a bit crude, he was loyal to the core and quite handy with his sword. He had gotten better each year and was his unofficial second-in-command, as well as being the Queen's personal shield. Then there was Morgan Barclay. He too hailed from the northern mountains. He was the nephew of the chief of the Barclay clan and had shown both his wits and martial skills in the campaign against the wildlings under Jon. The latter had been the one to recommend him to his brother. Due to his rowdy nature, Rickon had taken an almost immediate liking to the man. Not much later, he had been appointed as his sworn sword. Kat had been shocked, but he had been able to calm her down by ensuring her of the man's worth. Their 5th member was Denys Northgard. Before his anointment, he had simply been known as Big Denys. Most still called him that, but he had had to pick a noble surname to make him distinguishable, and he had picked Northgard. When asked why, he had shrugged. "I figured I will still be guarding the north," and it rolled off the tongue nicely. He was a quiet man, but a lot smarter than most gave him credit for. He had been a Winterfell guardsman and sergeant for 20 years and had fought valiantly during most of the wars in the south. His height stood around 6'5", and this, combined with his love for his battle axe, made him an imposing figure in the room. A thing Rob frequently used when making a dramatic entrance. Their newest member was Sir Daikon Brune. He was the youngest of Lord Eustace Brune's 6 grandsons. He had joined Rob's force with his kin at the Battle of the God's Eye River and fought with him until he had joined Jon Snow's conquest of Lannisport and Casterly Rock. He himself had noticed him during the campaign in the Stormlands but had forgotten about him afterwards. After he had seen him training again around the time of Jon's wedding, he had presented him to the king himself. The latter two were sleeping, as they had been protecting the royal couple during much of the day. Barclay had escorted much of the king's siblings to bed and was standing guard in their hallway right now. Their order would soon again be expanded. They had 4 places left in the guard, and their size limited their ability to protect the large royal family during events like these. Complaints had also been raised in the Riverlands by their lack of representation. He was the only one originating from there, with Brune hailing from Cracklaw Point. Rob had entrusted him with the task of finding some of his countrymen to join his ranks. His eyes had fallen upon a young knight named Benedict Blackwood. He was a second cousin of Lord Bryndon Blackwood. He and his brothers had served their lordly cousin ever since the death of their father in the battle against the Fakegan Targaryen. The young man was of an age with the king and had served Lord Bryndon as his squire since before the war. He had been present at the rape of the twins on the side of the Riverlanders and had fought under Rob from the beginning of the campaign that led to the Battle of the God's Eye. He looked upon him as he was laughing with one of his kin at the Blackwood table. He had asked his sworn brothers what they thought about him and all had agreed upon his judgment. He had proposed nominating him at the beginning of the feast, but Rob had vetoed that. He still had to talk to the Blackwoods. If they agreed, the nomination would be proclaimed the day after tomorrow, before the big hunt. Two more had caught his eye. Cedric Sewin, the oldest son of one of the late Lord Major's cousins, and Sir Jeremy Biglestone, third son of Lord Duncan Biglestone whom he had known personally since his youth. Both men had seen fighting during the war, albeit limited in nature. Cedric had only joined the fray when Cleesewin marched south and aside from its capture, he had stayed to guard the twins. Afterwards, he had only fought again during the Iron Islands campaign. Sir Jeremy had seen a lot of fighting during the beginning of the war and had been with Edmure during his defeat at Riverrun. However, he had been severely wounded at Atlanta and had spent the rest of the war recovering at his father's seat. Nothing had been decided yet, but both showed promise. After checking if baby Ricard was still sleeping soundly, he focused back on the conversation that the king was having with Liddle. "I hear your pleas about your lack of builders and stewards, Duncan. I will investigate signing a decree that any farmer, servant or craftsman who commits a big crime is to be sent to the wall. I will also write to my allies in the Vale, the Stormlands, the Westerlands and the Iron Islands to ask them to do the same. I thank you, King Stark." The man responded with a small bow. However, Rob simply raised his hand to signal that he wasn't ready. "This might solve your issues in the relatively short term. In the medium term, I will make sure that some of the orphans from King's Landing are sent to the wall. They are being trained in all sorts of crafts at the moment and can use these abilities to help your order. In the long term, the orphanages at Molestown can do the same. I thank you once more, King Rob." Big Little replied with a smile. After a bit of small talk, he stood up and walked back to his fellow clansmen. The rest of the night went the same as most northern feasts did. Many of the northern nobles drank themselves to a stupor, whilst some of the younger and braver, or should he say stupider, rivermen tried to compete them. Most of the latter paid the price for their mistake. It was the way it had always gone ever since the war. The only surprising thing about the evening had been how soundly little Ricard had slept through all the noise. He had kept the boy in his arms for what had likely been well over an hour, before his mother had come to pick him up. Together, they had said their goodbyes to the king and her family before retiring. Rob had joined some of his friends at the tables for some time, before he too had retired. Tyrell had accompanied the king to his chambers. He would stand guard there for most of the night. He thought about Hoster's great-grandchildren as he stripped of his armor. If his brother had seen him tonight, he probably would have made a comment among the lines of "This could have been your great-grandson, if you had just married the red wine girl as I had asked you." He smiled at the thought. Wherever his brother was, he knew he would at least appreciate his stubborn younger brother protecting his blood and legacy. He hadn't been able to save Lysa and her son from her stupidity and mistakes, he would make sure nothing happened to Edmure or Kat's families. He had sworn to protect them, and he would so until his dying day. 2 days later. Rob. These past few days had not gone to plan. The feast had gone great and he had had fruitful conversations with some of his vassals and the first ranger of the watch. Nevertheless, everything had changed the day after that. It was as if the gods were trying to give him a headache. It had started when he had sat together with Lord Bryndon Blackwood to discuss the ascension of his cousin Sir Benedict to the Kingsguard. Both the young knight and his lordly cousin had been pleased, but the latter had immediately made him another offer that he had apparently been preparing for some time. He had offered him the hand of his sister Bethany for Bran. It was an enticing offer. She was from the Riverlands, a must with Sansa and him marrying in the north. She was the only sister to not one, but two great lords there, both whom he regarded as his friends. She was also the younger sister of Bran's best friend for years now. He and Alan Blackwood were still inseparable after all this time. She was one of the few old gods believers in the Riverlands, which was fantastic. After years at Carhold, it was unmistakable how Big Mother's influence had been on Winterfell. If he wanted to guide House Stark back to their roots, as he had planned together with Aelys, his brother couldn't bring a pious southern girl to his court now. His children would of course have to marry in the south, but one generation could be enough to make House Stark the heart of the north again. However, the timing of it all was awful. Already, some houses like the Pipers were jealous of the boons the Blackwoods had gotten. By awarding them with not only someone in the Kingsguard, but a marriage too, complaints would once again start arising. The Riverlords would once again be split on the issue, with one side happy with the representation and the other angry and jealous about who got it. In the end, he had decided to go forth with the plan anyway. Beforehand, he had consulted Aelys, his mother and Uncle Brynden, and all had agreed about the bad timing, but also about the opportunity that needed to be seized. He had asked his brother about it as well, and to his surprise his 14-year-old brother had been enthusiastic about the idea. Alan has often spoken fondly of his sister throughout the years. I am sure we will get along. Besides, it will make Alan my brother in name. I wouldn't want it any other way. He had negotiated strictly with Brynden, but they had come to a compromise in the end. The large dowry would ensure Bran's future. He would of course lack for nothing in his life, but this money would be his own to do with what he pleased aside from him and the crown. Bethany would make a good wife for him. Everyone described her as gentle and easy to laugh, which should endear her to Bran quickly, as he was very similar. The actual marriage would have to wait 2 more years, as the girl was only 13 years of age at present. He had announced both developments to his lords at the hunt, although he had made 2 more decisions to take some of the attention of House Blackwood and win over the sympathy of the Riverlords. Firstly, he had announced that Bran would accompany them south when they left Winterfell to resume his fostering in Riverrun together with Alan Blackwood and the young lords Mutan and Daeari. The news had been well received by most of them, as they liked the idea of having a Stark in their lands forming bonds with their own. The second had been to name another to the Kingsguard as well. Sir Jeremy had only been vetted for a short while, but he liked him and he showed a lot of promise. His great-uncle had also agreed with the decision in the end. Awarding 2 knights from the Riverlands a position did much to lower the importance that was placed on the other one being a Blackwood. Bran had accompanied him on the hunt and had managed to impress a lot of the nobles. All had agreed with his plans for his younger brother when he had laid them out. Brandon would be made the master of Moat Cailin. He would be given the lands for life, but when he passed away or retired they would return to the crown. The overlordship of these lands would be fashioned according to that of the Gates of the Moon and the Bloody Gate in the Vale. A master of the moat would be named by the Stark in Winterfell, but it would always revert back to them upon his death. Most of the times the master would be one of the king's kinsmen, to symbolize the importance the gate to the north held. Construction on the keep would immediately start in spring. It would be rebuilt, but not to the splendor it once had. It wasn't necessary to have a curtain wall as high as that of Winterfell with 20 towers. Maester Lewin and his father had done some research on it and he had expanded upon that the past year. The original layout of the castle would be kept, but less extreme. The walls might have once been well over 80 feet, in this time and age 50 feet would more than suffice. A sturdy stone keep would be built where once its wooden predecessor had stood. It would be built in the style of the first men, adapted somewhat to make use of the new techniques in architecture. 12 towers would strengthen the outer wall, instead of the former 20 towers. The 3 remaining ones will be repaired and reinforced to incorporate them among those 12. The construction would take decades and overseeing it would most likely be Bran's life work. He had already ordered that he should be given extra classes in architecture, land clearing and town building. Once spring was upon them, works would start on the keep. At the same time, the beginnings of a village would be built along the north side of the construction site. This should in time grow to a small market town, preferably around 5 to 10,000 people and linked by continuous traffic to Winterfell, Barrowton, White Harbour, the Twins and Seaguard. His father had made great progress by clearing the grounds and establishing the first farming hamlet a few miles from the ruins. However, most of it had been destroyed by the Ironborn. Now, the place would be rebuilt, and half a dozen other ones constructed. For a market town the size he envisioned to flourish, over 200 more would need to be established. Alas, that would take decades or centuries and a big population growth around Winterfell first. It had cost him 2 full days to organize all of that, even with most of the plans for Moat Cailin already worked out in extreme detail by his father, Maester Lewin, and himself. Just when he had thought that the worst was over and that he could go back to his wife and children, Harmon Tyrrell had demanded to speak with him immediately upon their return. The conversation had turned his world upside down once again. Now he found himself in his solar waiting for his mother to arrive whilst thinking how to manage this situation. He had no experience with all of this and desperately wanted to speak to Alis, but he had to consult his mother first on this. Not much later, she hurried into his solar. "Rob, what happened? They told me you needed me to come here urgently. Are you hurt? Is Bran hurt? Where is your brother?" She fired off in quick succession. "No, mother, I am unhurt. Bran is also well. He did great. He managed to impress many of the noble, and they have welcomed both the betrothal and his rule of Moat Cailin. They were enthusiastic about the building plans as well." He calmed her. She took a deep breath and took a seat in front of him. "Then why did you need me this urgently?" "We have to talk about Arya, and we have to talk about her now." He sighed with his head in his hands. How did he even need to address this to his mother? "Arya?" His mother asked in confusion, but the confusion quickly made way for fear as she saw his facial expression. "What has she done? Where is she?" "She has been confined to her rooms for now. Tyrrell is standing guard in front of her room and Nymeria has been forced into the kennels by Grey Wind and Summer. No one is allowed in or out, not even the maids." He responded tiredly. "Rob. You have never punished her like this before. What has she done?" "She was found by Tyrrell in a secluded storage room close to the stables. However, she had not been alone. To quote Tyrrell, she was found in an intimate, albeit clothed, embrace with a man." His mother's eyes almost popped out of her head. "Arya was found with a man?" He nodded slowly. "Who was it?" "I'll have the boy flogged and sent to the wall." "And Arya, how irresponsible can she be? She doomed that poor boy to a life of servitude in the Night's Watch. Was it one of the stable boys? Or some young retainer of one of the houses present?" Lady Catelyn Stark exclaimed, anger clearly rising. He opened his mouth to answer, but she kept raving on. "Does anyone know? If people found out about this, no one respectable will want to marry her anymore." "Mother," he interrupted her, but she kept going. "I have to talk to her. Order Tyrrell to bring her here. She must be told to never speak of this." "Mother!" He practically screamed and she finally stopped talking. She looked up to him. "Yes, Rob. She was not found in the presence of one of the small folk. The man that was holding her in his arms was Cleesewin, Lord Cleesewin." He replied, emphasizing the importance of his title and family name. "Oh," was all she managed to reply. "Oh is about right. She was found in the presence of a great lord of the north. The one closest to Winterfell from a family that has gone above and beyond for us these past years. On top of that, I counted him as my friend. If I sent him to the wall, as I should, I would be seen by many as betraying their loyalty. Let alone that I could ever keep this a secret. Arya's dalliance would be the topic of every conversation from the wall to the Blackwater." His mother leaned back in her chair and put her hands in her hair. "Has he, you know?" she finally asked him. He looked into his mother's blue eyes. "Honestly, I don't know." She nodded at that in thought. "We have to talk to her. We have to know this and how it has come to be before we act." Now it was his time to nod in response. He called out for his guard. Daikon Brune was standing outside his door, having accompanied his mother to his solar. "Brune, go to my sister's Arya's rooms. Tyrrell is standing on duty there. Tell him to guard the other prisoner instead, he'll know what to do." The knight nodded and bowed his head in silence before storming off. "Other prisoner? Oh gods, Rob, have you taken Clee prisoner? He is one of the high nobles of the realm. his mother exclaimed once the door had shut again. But I don't want this to get out before we know how we'll deal with this. It was Turrell that locked him up for questioning in one of the empty rooms in the guest wing whilst awaiting my command. He is comfortable there, but he is not allowed to escape. A member of your King's Guard took a princess and a great lord in custody before you ever arrived. Rob, that is insane. His mother scolded him. This is dangerous. This could turn the entire nobility against you. Especially if they don't know why you did it. He handled the situation like he knew I would ask of him. I am very appreciative of his actions. I will not have his integrity questioned. We are here to discuss Arya's fate. My King's Guard is my own. He retorted strongly. His mother looked at him skeptically, but let it go. Not much later, his youngest sister arrived. The 15-year-old looked angry and annoyed, and the first thing she did after entering was demanding to see Nymeria. He ignored her and told her to take a seat. She threw a tantrum instead. No, I will not take a seat. I want to see Nym now. She feels horrible in the kennels and she is worried about me and can't bite through that stupid metal cage you put her in. Wait, how do you think you know what Nymeria is feeling? His mother asked suspiciously. He looked dangerously at his little sister. Their mother was the only one that didn't know about their warging. In the months after his return, he had talked with all his siblings about it and all had agreed it would complicate things if they told her. Even Sansa had agreed. They had gotten Rickon on board by threatening that otherwise mother would have tried to take Shaggy away. Now Arya was threatening the agreement they had had for 2.5 years. Arya looked conflicted at that, but she would not relent on the issue. I want her here for support. Now. She screamed at him. Young lady, you do not talk to me or your brother like that. I am your mother, and aside from your lord and brother, he is also your king. You will. Mother screamed at her in turn. I will do nothing until Nymeria is here. She shouted once more, squaring off against their mother in a defiant stance. Mother wanted to yell back at her, but he shut her up with a signal from his hand. She saw the storm clouds behind his eyes and almost took a step back from him. She apparently knew better than to keep talking. Arya, you will sit down. Now. He simply voiced, his voice hard as iron. She turned to him and started yelling, but she stopped when she saw him getting up from his chair. Grey Wind got up from next to his desk and got up to his full height as well. He stared at her in silence for a few seconds as she quieted down, before speaking again. I am the head of this family and the lord of this castle. You will obey me in this, Arya, whether you like it or not. I care a lot about you, but I swear to the gods that, if you don't sit down and shut up now, I will send you to the Silent Sisters and be done with your antics forever. He almost growled. Both women looked at him in shock. He had never used this voice to any of his family before, but he would not have this. She had betrayed him and his trust with a friend of his. He had been working non-stop day in day out to make the North a better place for all of his family and subjects. This could make a crack in everything he had so carefully built up over the years. Arya looked at their mother with fear in her eyes, but he cut that off. No, you will not look at her for support. If I decide to send you away, there is nothing that she or anyone can do about it. You will obey and you will do it now. Don't test me, sister, you will regret it for the rest of your life. He spoke coldly, his eyes daring her to take his challenge. They squared off against each other for a long time, before she finally sat down with an enormous scowl on her face. Good, now our mother and I need to ask you some questions. You will not yell at either of us, and you will always speak the truth. What you have done can jeopardize the stability of the kingdom. It is clear that you do not understand the consequences of your actions, so I will make you understand. He spoke, both his sister and mother looking at him like they didn't recognize him. Clear's fate will depend on your honesty here today. If you lie or hold anything back, both of you will be sent away for good. I will not have one of my friends defile my sister's virtue behind my back, whether he is a great lord or not. What, Rob? You would hurt Clee for this? He has done nothing wrong. He held up his hand. I will pass judgment here, Arya, not you. He looked at his mother and she had become completely pale. As he looked into her eyes, he knew she realized that he was serious about sending her away. Please Arya, listen to your brother. This is not just a matter of the family. The virtue and relations of a princess are a concern for the whole kingdom. Clea has publicly embarrassed and insulted Rob by doing this. It would be in Rob's power to send him to the wall or take his head for disrespecting his hospitality with his sister in his own halls. Arya looked flabbergasted between his mother and him. She looked at him with questions and shock in her eyes. It is within my right. He simply agreed. But we haven't even. I mean we haven't. Arya started stuttering, her cheeks growing red. Arya, please tell us everything. What happened, when it started and how it came to be? Lady Catelyn Stark asked her. Arya looked between both of them before relenting. She sighed and told him the story of how they had danced at Sansa's wedding feast and how they talked a while after. She found him funny and he had been helpful in showing her moves for her dagger. He didn't care if she wore weapons and didn't force her to do ladylike things, which made her feel comfortable around him. After that, they had talked more on his many visits to Winterfell and had danced again at Jon's wedding. After the wedding, things had taken a bit of a turn in her head and she had been asking herself if she had started to like him. On the last day of his visit 3 months ago, they had kissed somewhere deep in the Godswood. It was a chaste kiss, but she had liked it and was curious how it could feel. As such, she had initiated the same thing multiple times over the last 3 weeks. She had spurred him on more and more. Their kisses had become less chaste, although he refused to do anything more. After a few nudges from their mother, she had admitted that she was curious about intercourse and male anatomy and had planned to take it a bit further today before they were caught by Harmond. She had apparently tried to initiate some minor things before, but he had always refused to go along. He listened to her story in cold silence, taking in every word she said. After she was done, he looked upon her. You are telling me you haven't slept with him? He asked first. She turned completely red. I haven't, he didn't want to. Every time it got more intense, he stopped me saying that he couldn't do that and talked about you. He nodded at that. Maybe Clea had something of a brain left after all. You initiated everything. He liked it, but he tried to stop me the first time I saw him again 3 weeks ago. Saying that our first kiss had been a mistake, but in the end he caved in. He wanted it as much as I did. She replied, some of the defiance coming back to her eyes. Very well, thank you for telling us, Arya. You will be escorted back to your rooms by Sir Daikon. We will discuss what you have said and will talk with Lord Sewin. After that, and only then, will I allow Nymeria to go to your chambers. He spoke coolly. She looked at him ready to fight the issue but gave in with a scowl. He called Brune inside and he escorted his sister back to her rooms. Not much later Clea arrived with Harmond. The moment he got inside he started apologizing. I'm sorry, Rob. I did not take her virtue, I swear it. I tried to fight it, but I couldn't. I actually like your sister and... He simply held up his hand in response. Tell me your side of the story and tell me everything. A few minutes later, Clea Sewin had told him everything. He told him the same story Arya had done, although it became clear that he was trying to protect her and minimize her part in things. He answered their every question with guilt and acceptance of his mistake on his face. Afterwards, he too was let outside. What do you think? His mother asked him when they were once again alone. I believe them. There is no way they could have rehearsed this beforehand. Arya is still a virgin, which means that we have more options. Be that as it may, we need to act. You heard her. She wants to explore and we both know her well enough to know she will not wait until marriage. If we put an end to this without making other arrangements, this will happen again with someone else next month. That time, it might actually be a stable boy. His mother bit her lip and sighed but agreed with him. What are our options? Firstly, as I said, we simply break this up. We have them swear to the gods to end it and say nothing about it to anyone. Clea will listen to this, but Arya won't. She will try again and if Clea refuses she might find somebody else. Secondly, we punish them both severely in the hope that she gets so scared that she doesn't try anything anymore in the future. She looked shocked at that but didn't say anything. Thirdly, we don't do a lot and their relationship will continue. The consequence will most likely be either rumors about Arya spreading across the kingdoms before too long, or she will be pregnant with a bastard soon. Both combined is likely too. He summarized. That is not an option. I will not have my daughter talked about or behaving like a common whore. And never will a daughter of mine carry a man's bastard. His mother vehemently protested. He agreed with that. There is one more option. He sighed. What's that? She asked intrigued. We force them to marry. He muttered. His mother looked at him in shock. She will want to keep experimenting. She is of an age to feel desires. She will need to be married off quickly anyway. Clea is clearly infatuated with her, why and how I do not know. She seems to like him too, at least to some degree. He lets her be herself. Besides, I don't think we'll find a better candidate for her in the north. He is a great lord and he is the closest one to Winterfell. She always told us that she didn't want to leave. Well, she barely has to. Castle Sawin is less than a day's ride away from here. This way we too can keep an eye on her. He explained. Rob, she is too young, too reckless. She countered. She clearly isn't too young, or this wouldn't have happened. Besides, Sansa wasn't that much older. By the time the marriage is arranged, she will be closer still. She is reckless. Maybe a husband will do her some good. His presence and the running his keep can keep her entertained. She is losing her friends and she is bored. Alara has died, Wyler is married to Jon. She only has Lyanna left and she has been spending a lot of time with her family these past few weeks. Arya is bored and lonely. We could give her something to do and someone to care for. She thought long and hard. You are going to do this anyway, won't you? No, I promised you to not decide anything concerning my siblings without your support. I will keep that promise, but I think it is the best option. After all these marriages, few great lords remain without a wife. He is one of the best matches we could offer her in the north. There is precedent as well, Stark ladies and princesses have married into House Sawin before. Yes, I know that too Rob, and you are right about the distance and her being lonely. Still, it is all happening so quickly. It feels like I have only gotten you back and now Sansa is gone, Bran will once again be leaving in a week or two and now Arya too. It is too much to ask from me. You, my children are all that I have left. She replied and he could hear her voice breaking. He walked over towards her at the other side of the desk and took his mother in his arms. Mother, I will always be here. Edara and Ricard adore you and will remain here too. However, if you ask it of me, I will always let you travel around. To the Dread Fort to see Sansa, to Castle Sawin or even to Riverrun, if you wish it. You are not stuck here. Her eyes lit up at the name of her ancestral home, before she looked away. It's been so long. It's not even my home anymore. You could spend some time there with Bran and Edmure and his new son. He was named after your father. Don't you want to meet him? Yes, I do, but how could I, Rob? You and your children need me. Rickon needs me. She countered. Alis and I will make a progression through the Riverlands once spring is here. You could come with us through the neck and go along straight to Riverrun, whilst we tour the lands. You can spend time with Bran and Edmure's family there and see the Riverlands again. She smiled sadly. I would like that, but what about Rickon? Can he come with us? No, there always needs to be a Stark in Winterfell. He voiced decisively. However, I can ask for him to have help from Sansa, Arya and Jon. On top of that the council will remain here to run most of the things of the kingdom. He won't be alone. I assure you that. She nodded. We will talk about this later. What do we do with Arya? What do you think? Marriage might be her only shot. It is that or a Stark bastard, I'm afraid. A real one this time. She said with a conflicted smile. I'm afraid you're right. He sighed. Not much later, both stood in front of them. They looked uncomfortable lined up in front of them. He presented them with the option. Both seemed shocked, but in a completely different way. Arya seemed appalled by the general idea of marriage, whilst Klee seemed shocked at the idea that he would actually be considered for Arya's hand. Marriage. Rob, we had a deal. His sister retorted angrily. We did. However, that deal did not include experimenting with boys, Arya. If you wish to do that, our deal is over. So, you have the choice before you. Either you marry soon, be it to Klee or someone else, or I will send you away. He responded strongly. Rob. You can't send your sister away to the Silent Sisters. His mother exclaimed. No, with her virtue intact, I cannot. However, Queen Shireen Baratheon would love to have a companion of her own age. King Harold Arryn's wife would also accept the offer within a heartbeat. Some time away from the north, under the guidance of pious Septas, could do her some good. He replied calmly, and his mother seemed to quickly agree with his assessment. He saw Klee's face fall at the idea that his sister would be sent far away. He quickly regained his neutral expression, but it had unmistakably been there. It was the proof he needed that he actually liked her. Arya seemed completely shocked. That is the choice you give me. Marriage or banishment to the Vale or Stormlands. Come now, Arya. They are our valued allies. It would be no banishment. Our own father was a ward to the Arryns. You would be a diplomatic representative to bridge our differences. They would also keep you and your exploring better in line than I ever could. She growled. You are lucky NYM isn't here. She would rip your head off for this. She spat out. Would she now? He said, as he cocked his eyebrow. On cue, grey wind rose up to his height next to him and pierced into Arya's eyes. The silent challenge was clear for everyone to see, but his sister was the only one that didn't shy away from it. Argh, I hate you, Rob. You can't do this to me. She screamed. I can and I will. I gave you a choice. Besides, do you know how your antics reflect on you and the man next to you? He asked her calmly. Only now did she seem to remember Klee stood next her. He seemed hurt that she was so visibly appalled to the idea of marriage. Klee, I didn't mean it like that. I don't detest the idea of marrying you. I detest the idea of marriage in general. I wanted to be young and free. I wanted to travel the north with Nymeria at my side, maybe visit the free cities. Not bear someone's children and watch over one's keep. Cleesewin looked her in the eye. He spoke more seriously than he had ever heard him talk since they had spoken about the death of his father. You could do both. What? His sister exclaimed. Well, you always told me you loved spending time with me because you could be yourself around me and that you didn't have to play the little southern lady. You still wouldn't when we were married. On specific occasions you would have to wear a dress and in time you would have to help me continue the Sewin line, but the rest of the time you could still train with your weapons. He voiced carefully. I have a lot of responsibilities all over the north. I need to discuss trade and politics and I often get invited to feast and celebrations of other lords. Why not go there together? You and I, and Nymeria. You act the perfect lady at those feasts or when we entertain nobles at Castle Sewin, in turn you get your adventures on our way there and back or when we are alone. I am the lord of my own lands, Arya. Everybody can talk all they want, but no one can force me to order my wife to do anything. If you want to travel, we will travel. If you want to learn how to fight, we will train. The only thing you have to decide is if you're willing to do those things together with me. The whole room looked at him in shock. He had managed to pick up on the fact that Klee liked Arya, but this was something else entirely. You would allow me to do that? Arya asked quietly. I would. Of course, you would need to take care of some things in the household, but I have enough capable people to make the work light enough so you have a few hours every day to do with as you please. My sister raised you, Arya. I know what you are like. Have I ever mocked you for being wild and adventurous? Have I ever tried to change you? Arya silently shook her head. No, you have not. She whispered. Neither will I. If you accept, but only if you truly do, I would be delighted to make you my wife. Arya looked at him in conflict, before looking at him and mother. He kept his face neutral, albeit a bit softer than earlier. Their mother actually seemed to nudge her on. I do. I want to, but only if you swear all you just said to the gods. Arya said self-consciously. Klee laughed loudly. I Klee Sawin, head of House Sawin, swear to love and cherish Arya Stark the way she is. Wild, adventurous, stubborn and obstinate, as she will always be. I swear to accept Nymeria in my halls at all times without putting her in metal cages. I swear to travel the north and the riverlands with you and some of the free cities if the possibility ever arises. I swear to teach you how to fight and hunt. Most of all I swear to protect and care for you until my dying day. This I swear by the old gods. He smirked whilst saying most of the message, but at the last two sentences he turned dead serious. Arya gulped. Then I accept. Klee smiled at her and she awkwardly smiled back. Next, the two looked at him. He waited for a bit, before outstretching his arm to his friend. Then so it will be. He decided. However, I wouldn't count on too large a dowry. He added, only half-jokingly. Klee grinned apologetically at him in response. I think House Sawin can agree with that, under the circumstances. Under the circumstances, he replied whilst cocking his eyebrow. Arya hit him at that, but it wasn't hard. He looked her deep in the eyes. I truly believe this will be good for you, sister. However, always remember that whatever your name is, Stark or Sawin, you'll always be a one of us at heart. The gates of Winterfell will always be open to you and you will forever be welcomed home here. She smiled a little at that and gave him a small hug. His mother smiled at him too. Glad to see how they made up. He gave her an exhausted smile back. Chapter 74, The Spring Lady. 304 AC. Jon. He woke up due to a ray of sunlight that glimpsed through the curtains. It fell right on his face and he couldn't possibly close his eyes again. Besides, if it was morning already, he should get up now. He softly turned to look at Wyler, who was laying beside him. He tried his best not to wake her as he moved out of the bed and closed the curtains better. He walked past Ghost's corner of the room filled with cushions and blankets. His trusty companion had always slept there, close enough to the door to catch any intruders before he or Wyler even had a chance to wake. Now the corner was empty, and it made him smile. Ghost had found someone more important to protect than him and he loved his direwolf to bits for doing so. He looked back on the figure of his exhausted wife in bed, before leaving his rooms and slowly closing the door behind him. It had only been a week since she had given birth and she had been exhausted ever since. Robb had provided nursemaids so she could sleep through the night, but the birth had been hard on her and she needed her rest. Maester Lewin had assured them both that she would fully recover after a few weeks of extra rest and the midwives had insisted that she should sleep alone during this period, but Wyler would have none of it. Every night, she had come to his chambers and fallen asleep in his arms. Love-making was out of the question, but that is not why she wanted to be with him, nor he with her. Feelings had been slowly developing between them since their marriage and for him they had grown exponentially since seeing her pregnant with his first child. It was to that child that he was going now. He strode over to the nursery in quick and long strides, occasionally nodding to guards and servants that he passed in the halls. They all smiled knowingly at him, as this had become his new routine for the past few days. Every morning he got up and went to see his daughter. Whether the realm was in trouble or Robb needed him didn't matter, she came first. He himself had never met his father, and his uncle had had to restrain himself somewhat in taking up the mantle of father figure for him, due to Lady Catelyn's objections. His daughter would never experience that. She would be loved and adored by him, as if she was the greatest treasure in the world. Well, to him she was just that. He walked inside the nursery and saw a nursemaid sitting in a comfortable chair close to his daughter's crib. Even closer to it, Ghost was lazily dozing off until he heard him. He immediately got up and stalked over to him. His companion licked his face and he laughed loudly at the obvious show of affection from his companion. He hugged the huge direwolf that had well outgrown him by now. Together they walked over to the crib and looked inside. His daughter had awoken from his laughter and she looked up silently with curious grey eyes. His mother's eyes, Roderick Castle had told him. It was not the only thing she shared with her grandmother. She also shared his later mother's name. Lyanna they had called her, to the joy of many of the elder people in Winterfell and Wintertown. Ghost carefully nudged his snout against her cheek and the little girl tried desperately to grab towards it with her tiny hands, but the effort was in vain. He smiled at the sight. From the moment that she had been born, she had been comfortable around Ghost and he had been protective over her. Although never afraid or about to cry, she had been somewhat skittish if Grey, Summer or Shaggy got too close. This never happened with Ghost and the direwolf had unilaterally decided he was her protector now. He slept next to her crib every night and would only let her go out of his sight when she was in his, Wyler or Rob's arms. He picked his little girl up and carefully positioned her against his chest, with his hand supporting her under her bottom. She nestled her little head into his tunic around his clavicle and seemed to be content. Lewin had told him that babies' sense of smell was more developed than their other senses. Keeping them close and giving them the ability to smell you made it easier for them to recognize you and helped calm the baby down. It worked better when Wyler did it, but it seemed to work for him most of the time as well. The small folk had started calling her the Spring Lady, as she was born on the same day that the White Raven from the Citadel had arrived. A good omen, everyone had agreed, but all he cared for was the fact that she had been born healthy. She had a pale and fair complexion, which Wyler insisted was because of her Targaryen heritage. Her eyes were stark grey, even more than his own, and her hair was light brown. Lighter than Stark's normally had and a perfect mixture between his own brown hair and Wyler's blonde locks. To him, she was the most beautiful thing that he had ever seen. He talked with the maid about how the night had been and asked if she had recently been fed. Satisfied with the answers, he walked out of the nursery with his daughter pushed against him. Ghost walked next to him through the halls, his tail happily twisting from side to side. It was an important day today, as Lya would be entertaining her first guests. He had wanted to keep her hidden a little longer, but Robb had waved his demands away. A small feast would be held for the birth of the Hand's daughter. His brother had insisted upon it in a tone that marked the finality of the issue only hours after she had been born. During the day, Arya would arrive with her husband Clee. Their wish to wed had been a big surprise to him, until Robb had told him the real reason for it. He hadn't known whether to scold Arya or hit Clee after that, maybe he had wanted to do both. They had married within 5 months of the incident and seemed fairly happy together. Jonelle had been overjoyed and had already forced the little castles to start calling Arya auntie. She would be coming for the feast and would likely stay for a time to get to know his daughter. Sansa was still here with her daughter, as a snowstorm had prevented them from going back to the Dread Fort after Arya's wedding. Domeric had gone back alone without his wife or daughter to keep little Bethany Bolton safe, and after that Sansa had insisted on staying until his child was born. He had greatly appreciated that, and her aid had been a huge help to Wyler. Bethany and Lyanna had been placed together in the crib for the first time 2 days ago, and they also seemed to like each other's company. The Marndaelis would also be arriving. Lord Wyman had stayed to rule his lands, but Sir Willis, Lady Winifred and her husband Harmond would all be arriving with Arya today with some of their vassals. They also brought their son Little Wyman with them, and it would be the first time the future Marndaeli heir would be presented to the realm. Yesterday evening, they had received word of their arrival at Castle Serwyn together with a few members of House Locke. Many minor nobles sworn to Winterfell would attend too, as well as some of his own. All houses within a week's ride from Winterfell had been invited, as such multiple of the close-by Wolfswood clans would attend. They had slowly trickled in over the last few days. To his surprise, Biron Tallheart, Master Leobald's young second son, would also be making the journey. Torrens Square was 135 miles away from Winterfell. Making that journey in 5 or so days was no small feat, spare horses or not. However, the most unexpected visitors would be Harry on Karstark with his 1-year-old son Edric, who had already been on their way towards the capital for a random visit. His wife would remain at Carhold to administer the keep, but Harry had insisted on coming to Winterfell with his son. Serena had recently gotten pregnant again, and he didn't want to risk her health or that of their baby and would go back before her time to give birth came. Tor couldn't wait to finally meet his little nephew, and Osric Karstark was looking forward to having Edric play with his own son, the 8-month-old Veon Poole. Harry-on and Edric would not be traveling alone though, as Harry's brother-in-law, and their mutual friend, Small Janumber, and his young son Osric had been visiting Carhold at the time. Both accompanied the Karstarks to Winterfell, and many minor nobles along the way had joined them. As such, Rob would once again get his wish of hosting a large part of the North's nobility under the pretext of Lionel's birth. Of course, the weather helped with travel these days. All snow south of the neck had melted and new snowfall north of it had become sparse. Most lords had started to make work of shoveling the snow from their most important roads, and the effects could immediately be seen on travel and trade. Today their guests would spend preparing for the festivities, but the days after that they would want to talk with Rob or him about trade and infrastructure improvements. Roderick Dustin had been very helpful whilst planning the latter. The man knew every keep or hold fast from Flint's Finger to Deepwood Motte and from the Stony Shore to Moat Cailin personally. He had also accompanied the army to the Riverlands and seen much of the lands there as well. He had given invaluable information, and together with Lewin they had created many plans to better the kingdom before next winter. He walked over to his solar, which Rob had provided for him. It wasn't far from the king's solar, a handy feat for if he had to discuss things with him. He pulled the key from out of his pocket and opened the door. No guards were stationed there yet, as he was earlier than usual. It didn't matter, no one would bother him with Ghost present. He walked into the room, where he spent most of his days. The last 2 years of his life had been spent here, with Wyler or at Sea Dragon's Point, not forgetting traveling to and from it. He walked behind his desk and looked at the papers he had left scattered there yesterday. Mostly things considering his own lands. He put Leia down in the crib he had built for her next to his desk. Rob had jokingly pestered him with the fact he had made a nunnery from his solar, but he didn't care. He wanted his daughter close and Wyler needed her rest. Ghost started softly licking the little baby's face, and the expressions she made told him that she didn't mind this at all. He sat down and looked upon his work and sighed. He got a map from Sea Dragon Point and another from the detailed area where the keep would be built from under the stacks of papers. He looked at them and made notes on the map by what the letters coming from his overseers told him. The cutting of the forests had begun to make the building of the keep and the expansion of the existing village possible. A few tons of logs were being cut down and they would be used to help building the keep, as well as a small harbor, an extended barricade and houses for the future village. The latest news told him that the barricade was close to finishing and they had started building a small dock as well. That was great news, as the village was progressing nicely. It had already partly been extended to house the workers and some of their families who had moved in, as well as a few dozen of the wildlings and Ironborn survivors. Most of the latter had also started helping the construction efforts. The males had joined the workforce and the women provided soup and food for the workers, braided necessary ropes or stoked fires to keep the men warm. In turn these families received houses and food for free, and already 300 local people from all over the point had flocked towards it for the prospect of food and shelter. Sea Dragon Point had housed some 40,000 people, of which some 500 were now living at his village together with an extra 160 people that he had brought in. His people were spread very thinly over a large area, however the population would soon be expanded. Once most of the guests of the feast had returned home, he would revisit his lands. He would bring with him a large amount of people that he and Rob had prepared to march. A force of 600 regular small folk, 20 stonemasons and 150 lumberjacks and builders would be accompanying him to the west. His workers were now clearing the area for the keep and leveling the ground. Hopefully, the work on the actual keep could start as soon as he arrived with the masons. In addition to that, Rob was still convincing many people that had been rescued from the Iron Isles to join me. Lady Dustin had also promised that some 300 people of those, who had taken refuge in Barrowton, would be marched towards his lands on his command. 1,500 wildlings had been living on the area already, spread thinly across the lands. Many of those were women and children, and 115 marriages between them and locals had already occurred. One of the first things he would do upon arrival was organize another mass wedding between the different groups once he arrived, especially the wildlings. The group needed to be stamped out as a different entity or problems would arise sooner or later. The more they mingled together, the brighter their future. Another group that had moved into his lands were the clansmen, both of the mountains and the Wolf's Wood. Although they had mostly settled in remote areas in the hills and woodlands, they were quickly intermingling with the locals and few complaints arose of them. On top of all that, Rob had promised him that many of the orphan craftsmen and farmers would be sent towards his lands in small groups in the following years. However, the most important things he could do to raise the population was raise the natality of the locals and limit the loss of people due to sickness and hunger. He had been sending large amounts of food, leather and fur towards the area during the last year of winter on top of what Rob sent to limit any casualties. He had also allowed the locals to cut down trees to warm themselves. Next to limiting the casualties, it also had the added benefit of endearing him to most of the locals and the majority of the lower nobility. He looked everything over and put it in a neat stack at the top right of his desk. For now, he had to occupy himself with looking into the tax agreements of the houses that would be attending. No doubt, multiple of them would ask to renegotiate parts of it to make better investments. He hated the fact that there was no kingdom-wide tax policy. Every house had different rates depending on their produce, historical agreements, or temporary punishments and tax cuts. Still, most of the northern lords had been very happy with the new regime. They had all made a lot of money during the wars, and afterwards Rob had had to decide what to do with the taxes. The old system had been easy: peasants paid tax to masters and knights, who paid taxes to lords, who paid taxes to high lords, who paid it to House Stark, and House Stark paid to the Iron Throne. However, there was no Iron Throne anymore. So, Winterfell got to keep all of their incomes and got huge amounts of new incomes that the Tullys paid them in taxes. Tariffs set on trade with outside kingdoms would also be paid to Winterfell directly from White Harbor, Duskendale, Maidenpool, Solpants, Seaguard and others. This effectively meant that House Stark's balance had more than tripled on paper. Of course, this was not yet the case. The areas of the southern and western Riverlands had gotten tax breaks for at least a decade to recover from the devastation of war. Some of the former Crown land houses partially compensated this by paying extra taxes for their involvement in the war. Winter had greatly limited income from trade tariffs, but it was quickly picking up again. House Stark hadn't gotten as much money as during this winter for centuries, and from now on the income would continue to rise all through summer. Rob had decided to offer a tax cut to all northern lords to help increase prosperity. He had debated with many vassals and advisors and had lowered taxes on the profit coming from agriculture, produce and internal trade by 5%. Taxes from mining and outside tariffs would remain the same, as otherwise the Mandaealis would benefit unequally from the measure. All lords had sent grateful letters in response to the measure, but Rob had instilled his expectations in them in return. He wanted them to invest in their lands. He expected that they improved and maintained infrastructure, actively aided population growth and the construction of small new settlements in their lands, and that they increased production of local goods and their trade. Not everyone had been as keen in doing everything from that list, but most seemed busy making improvements to their lands in ways they saw fit. The Umbers and Karstarks were planning further settlement on their lands, whilst encouraging local trade with the Skagga Sea. The mountain clans and Master Roose Riswell would promote trade and infrastructure with each other and the Night's Watch. The Riswells and Dustins were promoting trade to the Flints and Mallisters, and so on. All of it were small gains, but if you added everything up across the whole north, a significant impact started to be visible. However, more work laid ahead of them now that spring had come and winter had passed. Once in a while, he looked to his daughter. She slept for most of the morning, under the scrutinizing gazes of Ghost, who nudged her with his muzzle when she started to move or make noises. An hour before lunch, Wyler and one of her ladies walked in to get Lyak. She kissed him in greeting and thanked him for the rest he had given her, before quickly leaving him to his work. Ghost seemed sad when they left, but he loyally stayed put beside his desk. "Are you hungry, boy?" he asked the large direwolf. He hadn't hunted ever since Lionel had been born. He had only eaten things given to him from the kitchens. Ghost perked up and nodded slightly, but he seemed more than a little hesitant to act upon his desires. "Lya is all right, Ghost. She is with Wyler now and she is safe. Wyler has guards with her at all times," he replied, knowing him far too well to not understand where he was coming from. Ghost made a face, as if saying guards. "You call that being guarded? I could swat those two-leggers with their pointy sticks away in my sleep." He laughed at his companion and scratched him behind his ears. You could. There is no better guard than you are, but for now she is safe enough. She will need you to protect her at the feast tonight. You better be well fed and strong for that." He lectured the direwolf. This seemed to persuade him, and after licking him on his face a few times, The direwolf slowly paced towards the door. He put his large paw in the ring of the handle and with some difficulty pulled the door open. It always amazed him when he did that, but it had been a skill all the adult direwolves had picked up. It had been especially annoying in the case of Shaggy, as the direwolf could now get broken in through almost every small gate or doorway. The direwolf stalked out and completely shocked the guard standing watch. The man excused himself moments later and closed the door behind him. Afterwards, he had lunch with his Wyler, her ladies and those of his vassals that were present before continuing his work. A few hours after lunch, he had to host their guests, but he didn't mind it as much as he normally did. He was glad to see Arya and immediately took her and Klee to meet his daughter. His sister had sported a huge smile on her face for hours, after Klee had told her that he thought Lya looked a little like her. The day had gone by quickly and it was already time to dress for the feast. His young squire, Hollis Slate, helped him to pick out his clothes and dress in them. He had been so pleased with the boy during his campaigns in the Westerlands and Iron Islands that he had asked Lord Slate for permission for the boy to continue serving him. The old Northern Lord had been overjoyed, especially when he was made hand and given his own keep later on. House Slate was neither a very wealthy nor a very strong northern house, even though they were a high lord. Having connections with Winterfell and the Hand of the King, as well as a new house in the peerage, was a godsend for them. The boy had served him for more than 3 years now and he was very happy with him. He was dutiful, honorable and smart, albeit a little quiet. He did well in his lessons with Maester Lewin and his martial skills progressed as expected. The boy insisted on accompanying him on all his trips to see Dragon Point and had always found a way to make himself useful. After he was ready, he walked over to Wyler's room. Lya was laying on her bed. One of Wyler's ladies, the daughter of a knight sworn to White Harbor, was keeping her busy. He walked over to his wife and kissed her softly below her left ear. She smiled and turned around, awarding him with a small peck of her own. "I'm almost ready. Will you take Lya?" she asked him and he nodded. He picked up his little girl from the bed, who was dressed in the clothes of their new house, and slowly paced around the room with her, as Wyler put on her jewelry. Not much later, they left the room together. 2 of Wyler's ladies trailed behind them, as Hollis walked in front of them opening the doors and announcing their arrival in the Great Hall. At the start, he or Wyler had Lyanna with them at the table, but after a while she was put in a designed area in the corner of the room. 6 children were playing there now, 2 girls and 4 boys, under the watch of 2 men of the Kingsguard. The mood when looking towards the area was clear, this was the future of the North. Lya was in the corner with Bethany Bolton playing next to her. A bit more to the side were Rickard Stark, Edric Karstark, Osric Umber and Veon Poole. The 4 boys seemed to be loosely playing together, smacking wooden toys on the ground in turn whilst babbling away. The menacing appearances of Harmon Turrell and Sir Dickon Brune towered above them, their keen eyes scanning the room and everyone that even came remotely close to the children. He had to admit that their grey cloaks gave reassurance to him as a parent. However, their presence was completely pointless. In between the guests and the children lay 3 massive direwolves, lazily looking around the room whilst nibbling on large pork chops. Grey Wind, Lady and Ghost were all the protection the children would ever need and everyone in the room knew that. He looked down from the dais from his place of honor at Rob's right and looked over his countrymen and felt at ease. He looked over Umbers, Karstarks, Sawins, clansmen and others. This was home. They were his friends and his family. He once again thanked himself for having the courage to reject most of his father's inheritance and to settle for peace and a family. He looked over to his wife to his side and saw that she was tiring. "How are you doing, my love?" he asked her. She smiled knowingly at him. "Well enough, John. I will last another hour, after that I think I will retire." He nodded in agreement to the sentiment. "I will take care of Lya. Ghost and I will put her to bed and make sure nothing happens to her." He smiled softly at her. He wanted to take as much worry and responsibility away from her as possible. She was still weak, and he wouldn't have anything happen to her. His daughter would have both parents when growing up, he had sworn to that. She smiled at him and there was a small twinkle in her eyes. He didn't think anyone else had noticed but him, but he was certain that it had been there. She grabbed his hand under the table and squeezed it. "Thank you, John. Thank you for all you're doing, she whispered. He simply laughed it off, although that smile made him feel warm inside. She's as much my responsibility as she is yours. It is nothing. Afterwards he added laughingly. Besides, it takes me more effort to drag Ghost away from her than actually letting her stay with me. This got her to laugh openly as well, and she squeezed his hand again. Sangza looked questioningly in their direction, but after seeing him smile she smiled back. They looked at their daughters lying next to each other and smiled back at each other. Beautiful sight, isn't it? She smiled. The best one I have ever seen, he whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. He saw how Bethany rolled over clumsily towards Lady. The direwolf seemed to understand the girl and she put her paw closer to her. This was all Sangza's girl needed to grab and turn until her head rested upon the direwolf's front leg. There she seemed to stop and rest, a content smile upon her face. Lionel was laying on her back. She was way too small to turn over or do anything except making small movements with her mouth or her tiny hands. Even so, Ghost had found a way to play with her. He softly moved his tail over her head, which got her to smile or look stupefied every time. Suddenly, he saw Arya looking at them. She seemed jealous. You want one too? He joked loudly towards her, whilst nudging his face towards the children. Arya seemed taken aback, but to his surprise she blushed heavily. He and Sangza raised his eyebrows in surprise, and Rob, Alice and Lady Caitlin joined in with questions. Arya seemed to get overwhelmed in no time, but Klee saved her. Arya and I would be happy to welcome any children we would get, now or later. I would love to be a father and have a duty to my house, but it is not the priority right now. Arya knows this and is just looking out for me. It was clever. He put all the blame on himself and got her out of the wind with her family. Lady Caitlin sighed jokingly. Rukan is barely out of his linen cloths and now I am getting overwhelmed by grandchildren. This got a laugh out of all his siblings and their spouses, except for Rukan. Hey! I am no baby, I am almost 10 years old, he exclaimed, accompanied by a loud bark from Shaggy. Rob rolled his eyes and a stern look settled on his face. Rukan, keep Shaggy in check. It is no sight having them bark that loudly for things as little as a joke at your expense. Look around and see how they are all looking at you. Rukan's eyes scanned around the room and he followed his gaze. Most of those seated at the tables closest to them were all looking at his little brother. Rukan looked a little ashamed and patted Shaggy to calm down. Excuse me, Rob. I will try to make sure it doesn't happen again. Don't be so hard on your brother Rob, he is trying his best. Lady Caitlin tried to soften the mood, as she soothingly waved through Rukan's curly hair. It's not like he can completely control the direwolf. Shaggy has always been wilder than the rest. I am hard on him because he needs it from time to time, mother. Except for you, I am the only one who can do it. Besides, what you say about the direwolves isn't entirely true, mother. They bond with you, emotionally. He replied, looking for the right word without giving the warging away, but half the table already knew about that. He definitely knew that none of the council knew about, didn't know whether Rob, Sangza or Arya had told their spouses. He hadn't told Wyler, but he had considered it many times. It might not be long before he did. Klee seemed oblivious to the hidden meaning, but Alice looked knowingly upon Rob. This might be the answer to his questions. What do you mean emotionally? Lady Caitlin looked at her eldest son. The whole table had now shifted their attention towards the king. When they were pups, they bonded with each of us. They looked at us as their role models and adapted their personalities to ours. That's why Lady is the most well-behaved, why Grey Winds acts so protective over his siblings, and why Nymeria and Shagidog are so wild. They adapted to us. So yes, it's partly Rukan's fault. If he adapted his own behavior, maybe Shaggy would mimic that. Orikan looked at his shoes under the table, whilst his mother looked at him with his mouth open. You mean you can control their behavior that much? Not necessarily, Rob lied, but they will adapt to you. Why do you think there are 3 direwolves with the children right now? We never told them to do that. They know how important they are to us. They look after them themselves because they notice our priorities. These animals are smarter than anything else out there, mother. I know it's hard to understand when you don't have them, but it is true. So what you are saying is that, when Arya has children, Nymeria will behave the same way? Klee asked. Even earlier he spoke up. Ghost knew Wyler was pregnant before any of us ever did. She never left her side from that moment, unless I ordered him to do so. Ever since she gave birth, she doesn't spend a fraction of that time with her anymore. Ghost still loves Wyler and likes her around, but he noticed that my priorities have changed to Lyanna and has shifted his behavior because of it. Everybody at the table looked at him, then at Ghost and Lyanna, then at Wyler and back at him. Klee looked at him with interest. You are telling me that the added benefit of marrying into the Stark family is that my heir will be the best protected child in Westeros? He smirked. Rob replied, except for my children of course. He smirked back. Or mine, he added. Or mine, Sansa finished the question. They all looked to each other and laughed. Lady Catelyn looked baffled, but not unhappy. She looked back at Rickon and then at Robb. Well, I am glad Rickon has you all to help him with this because I don't think I'll ever fully understand the bond that you all share with those animals. However, I still think you could be nicer to your little brother whilst doing it. Robb simply smiled at her knowingly. I will try. He responded, before looking at Rickon and calling him over. The boy slowly walked over, Shaggy trotting behind him with his tail flat to his body. I am so stern because I care for you, little brother. Father was sometimes stern to us as well and it made us better people. Father isn't here, but he would wish for you to get the same guidance I did. You are as true a Stark as I am, and you deserve no less. Do you understand that? Rickon nodded slowly in reply. Robb ruffled his hair. Good. Now, it is time for some fun. You have been sitting still here for way too long. You are probably bored out of your mind, aren't you? Rickon's face could have had the word bored written upon his face, it wouldn't have made the sentiment more obvious than his facial expression. Ha ha, that's what I thought. You have my permission to leave the table and go play with the castles and the other children your age that are present. Robb laughed. Rickon smiled a huge smile, but before he could run off Robb caught his collar. On one condition Rickon's face fell in anticipation. Their little brother asked. You take Edda and Shaggy with you and you make sure Shaggy is kind to her and not so kind to anyone that is mean to her. You are a man of House Stark. It is your job to protect her. Robb said meaningfully. Rickon looked over to his little niece sitting next to Alis, as she perked up at the mention of her name. He shrugged and agreed, before marching over to Edara and pulling her chair back. Come, we're going to play. He told her kindly, but uncaring about her reply. Edara smiled and jumped after him. Come Shaggy. He called after him without looking, knowing that the direwolf would follow. They walked around the table and his 9-year-old brother took his 4-year-old niece's hand and together they walked down the stairs to the hall. On Rickon's other side, Shaggy stalked slowly, whilst scanning the room intensely. He saw Robb nod towards Cedric Sewin and the Kingsguard immediately knew what to do and followed them down. Edara seemed quite fond of the newest member of the Kingsguard and Robb seemed to be thinking of assigning him as her personal shield. The fact that Cedric was kin with the Castles through their mother Jonelle would also help in this situation. The whole family looked fondly upon the scene and he saw that many of the guests did too. They continued talking about the direwolves in hushed tones amongst themselves, until Robb told him he needed to tell him something in private. He pulled his ear closer to his brother and motioned that he was listening. Word has come in this morning. The last of the dragons has finally been slain on the Dragonmont by Lord Hammersmith's men. It seemed that the dragon had laid a clutch of eggs of which 2 had hatched. Lord Hammersmith decided that the risk was too great and attacked their lair with over 100 men armed to the teeth, accompanied by movable scorpions and dozens of archers. All 3 dragons were killed and the dragon eggs confiscated and brought to Dragonstone. He let that news sink in. Now the time of the dragons was finally over. He thought back to Rorgal and the deep bond they had shared, albeit for such a short time. The white dragon that had flown away had been his brother. Viserion, Rorgal's memories had named him. He knew it was good news that the dragons were gone. There would always be men trying to control them and sooner or later a Dragaseed would succeed. His descendants or the Baratheons would be the obvious candidates, but on the island of Dragonstone every peasant had more than a few drops of Valyrian blood in their veins. He sighed and wordlessly said a small prayer to the old gods. Wherever Rorigal's soul may be, let him have his well-deserved rest and let him reunite with his brothers in peace. He turned to his brother. Thank you for telling me first, Rob. I appreciate it and I know you need to tell the court. Just try to leave me out of it, if at all possible. The bond I shared with that dragon's brother. It was too deep. Rob nodded. Do you know what you'll do with its bones? I will have a large secret room built that will only be available to my family somewhere in a cellar. I will have Rorigal's carcass restored and set there, with his brother Drogon's skull close by. Is there room for another skull? What do you mean? He perked up. Lord Hammersmith has sent word. The skull will be arriving by ship in White Harbor in a few weeks. He once swore to you to do this before the eyes of much of the united nobility of Westeros. He wishes to honor his vow. Rob explained. A weight fell from his shoulders that he hadn't known was there. He nodded with a small smile. There will be room enough. Rob smiled back. He looked around the room and saw that people were starting to mingle. Young Biron Tallheart could be seen talking to Harmond Umber, whilst many lower vassals were moving from table to table. He thought back on many of his war compatriots and how some of them would never get to see his daughter, especially Sir Wendell. The Marndaily Knight would have loved her. He would have loved his marriage to Wyler and the joining of their houses. Many others, like Darin Hornwood, Eddard Karstark, Osric Umber and Rickard Riswell, were being missed by their friends and loved ones. It gave the feast a melancholy hue for him. Wyler had once remarked that he might have inherited this from his father, as he had been known for his melancholy and solemn moods. Still, the war remained stuck in his head. He turned back to his brother because of this. How is your book coming along? He asked him. Rob looked at him in surprise and answered in a hushed tone. SHHT, I don't anyone to know about that yet. He looked around if anyone had heard, but no one seemed to be paying attention. However, now that you ask. It was going well. I have penned down everything I remember up until Atronton now. The battle itself and the loss of Lord Rickard. I have difficulty writing about it, but I will have to soon enough if I ever want to finish the damned thing. He whispered. I get that. He responded in a hushed tone, the melancholy dripping from every word he spoke. Rob looked at him with understanding. Thinking about Sir Wendell again. He nodded. His brother put a hand on his shoulder. He would be proud of you, John. Father would as well. You have rejected the South and the madness, made a name for yourself, married a high-born lady that is good for you and you have become a father. On top of that, you have become a true Northern Lord in your own right and kept true to your mother's memory. Everyone who has ever tutored or helped you is very proud of what you have achieved. He smiled sadly back at him. But at what cost? Rob sighed. A great one, but one everyone that has fallen would have been willing to pay for this result. I believe Father would have gladly given his life to see the Stark family as big, healthy and strong as it is now. The same goes for the North. Sir Wendell would be happy that White Harbor and his house are safe. He would be overjoyed knowing what good and happy marriages his nieces have made and the fact that his brother, his father and his ward are safe. You're right. Still, I miss him and the others. He sighed sadly. Rob pinched his shoulder softly. I know, so do I and everyone in this hall and many others outside of it. However, this is life. You have to continue now. You have to continue in their name and honor, just like Father did for us after the rebellion and the loss of most of our family. It is our job now to bring new members into our family and keep them safe. He voiced, as he looked upon the children playing in the corner. He looked upon the sight of his little girl hunched against Ghost's flank and took a deep breath. You're right. I have to be there for her now. He voiced. And for all her siblings that are soon to follow, if you and Wyler keep this thing up that you are both doing. His brother winked at him. This thing we are doing. He raised his eyebrow. Holding hands under the table. Sleeping together every night against Maestas' orders. You going above and beyond to take Lyanna out of her hands so she can rest. You know, that thing. Rob laughed. He shook his head but couldn't help but smile. He looked him into his blue eyes and smirked. Stark, you can put yourself on the high horse all you want, but never think that I forgot how you acted the last weeks of Alice's pregnancy after we came back from the war. Let alone the first weeks of Ricard's life. I think even the washerwomen got bored of you presenting them with your heir and the future of House Stark every 3 days. Rob looked at him with plain annoyance and just patted him hard on the back, as they laughed loudly together. The whole family table looked at them in question, but many of them smiled fondly upon the spectacle. All of them had told him that he had changed, most thought for the better. He simply felt home and loved, a thing he had struggled with for all of his life. Now, with Rob, Wyler and Lai, all seemed to fall into place. Even his bond with Sansa was stronger than it had ever been. He looked around the hall again, at his sisters, his nieces and nephew, his daughter and his little brother. This is home, he thought. This is what Father always wanted for me and I finally got it. Chapter 75, Building Up Infrastructure. 305 AC/5F. Rob. He read the date on the letter he had gotten, and it still looked weird to him. An agreement had been reached with the Arryns and Baratheons to change the calendar. The year 300 AC would from now on be known as the Year of Freedom, as it was the year that marked all the decisive battles against the Lannisters and their allies, as well as the one against the fake Aegon Targaryen. It had been agreed that the year 301 after conquest would from now on be known as the year 1 after freedom. This was done to ensure that another important notion of the Targaryen legacy was discarded. The timeline would always remember people of a united Westeros, an idea that had to be stamped out by its roots. The Storm Kingdom and the Vale had implemented it easily enough and the Ironborn had followed the idea enthusiastically. The other kingdoms had not been so easily persuaded, but they had at least managed to get the Westerlands to change it as well. This was a major blow to the south, as from now on all trade to the Reach and Dawn would be done using the new system. It wouldn't be long before the nobility would have to cave into their merchants' demands or risk setting up a huge bureaucracy that they couldn't afford. They had chosen the system, as it would take the least amount of change. By keeping the year 301 as the year 1, easy transitions were guaranteed for maesters and record keepers everywhere. Still, the new system felt foreign to him, but that was of course the entire idea behind it. Nonetheless, the content of the letter was of course more important. More information about the road network that had come in just in time for his talks with his master of infrastructure. Roderick Dustin could arrive at any moment for their long-awaited talk which he had been preparing for a long time. Together they had been working on an ambitious plan to help the infrastructure everywhere in the kingdom. They had help, mostly from his father's old plans. However, these plans only concerned parts of the north. His plans went much further, encompassing the whole of it and parts of the riverlands that were devastated by war as well. It also didn't restrict itself to roads. It included the construction and establishment of trade lanes, harbors, towns, villages and the expansion or renovation of existing keeps, towns and harbors. He walked over to Grey Wind, who was contentedly sleeping in the corner of his solar. He had grown absolutely massive and was the largest of the direwolves. As their alpha, that's what the maesters called the leader of a wolf pack, he literally and figuratively towered above them. Interestingly, the males were all bigger than the females, but the closest to Grey in size were Ghost and Shaggy-Dog. Rooken's wild pup had grown into a dangerous beast 7 foot tall. It was the only one of the direwolves Grey had to continuously keep in check, together with occasional bouts from Nymeria. Ghost was always loyally at his side, as the direwolves kept mimicking his and his siblings' behavior. His thoughts about the direwolves were interrupted by a knock on the door, as the guard announced Master Roderick's arrival. Grey perked up as his advisor entered the room, but he soon went back to sleep after receiving a few relaxing scratches behind the ear from him. He walked to the table in the center of the room with his advisor, and the man from the Barrowlands put his collection of maps, scrolls and letters on the table next to his own that had already been there. They sat next to each other and laughed with a sigh, knowing that none of them would leave this room in the next couple of hours as they had too much to discuss. "If it is acceptable to you, I would propose that we start with the roadways, Your Grace." Roderick started, as he pointed to a certain stack of letters and maps. "That is very acceptable, Roderick. Please, commence when you are ready," he replied. "If I have it correctly, You asked me to look into what your vassals are already doing to improve the road network on their own. In addition to that, what needs to be done aside from that with an emphasis on the southwest, west and north side of the north. You also asked me to look into the southern riverlands and the agreed upon connection from Riverrun to Bitterbridge. He started, as he searched for some scrolls. He nodded in agreement to his advisor. The southwest was the region I knew the best, and I contacted all my family contacts as well as the nobles there. The Dustins and Riswells have finished planning a large expansion on the road between Barrowton and Riders Spring, the seat of House Riswell. Construction works can start at any moment now and are only dependent on the ever-improving weather. The work will greatly improve trade between the Rills and the Barrowlands and help achieve your goal of improving Barrowton's position as the regional trading hub without the need of any dime from the royal coffers. He grinned at that. This was very good news. Not only for his coffers, but it also confirmed that both Lady Dustin and her newly appointed heir approved of his vision for the region. House Dustin were the key figures for his ideas in the southwest and were essential to its success. Sadly, not much else is happening on its own in the region with much work to be done. The Riswells are spending most of their coin on this road, and their diminished influence on the Stony Shore has made them shun investments there. They and their vassals seem to be looking into expanding some of their fishing villages and small local ports now that the Ironborn threat has severely diminished, but nothing concrete just yet. The Tall Hearts are investing in their lands, but more in population growth and expanding their farming industry. They intend to increase their food production to help feed the north and increase their own population and incomes. However, no efforts have been made to increase connectivity, aside from those that go by boat on their lake and the river south to the Salt Spear. It seems they are looking to bypass Barrowton and trade directly with at least the Flints of Flint's Finger from what I have heard. I don't mind that in small numbers, as Flint's Finger has often been forgotten by the North, but it can't hinder our plans for Barrowton. He responded. Roderick nodded in agreement. I have made multiple suggestions, on which I will end my talks of the region. He nodded and signaled him to continue. House Dustin has already improved its connectivity to Moat Cailin under your father's rule, but those improvements were minor and are not according to the standard you wish them to be. Aside from Riders Spring, not much is happening yet, except for the enlargement of the docks and the construction of extra naval way stations in certain villages along the Fever River. Lady Barbary told me she is willing to work on other projects with us in the future, but these have her priority right now. The Flints of Flint's Finger are investing in more fishing industry, to take advantage of the drop in Ironborn shipping after their population decline. They are also investing in their naval capabilities, both those of military and mercantile uses. They have improved their relations with the Riswells, Reeds and Whitefizz due to marriage diplomacy and your brother's choice to grant Lord Timothy's little brother land. I expect them to improve their personal trade with these houses, although I am not sure how that will go with the Reeds. The new House Shield is trying to establish their rule over the Stony Shore. This is going well, but at a slower pace than expected. This is mostly due to the resistance of old allies of the Riswells. In the meantime, they have successfully constructed a sturdy wooden keep along the coast and a large village is growing there. I see it growing into a small town in time, but this will take years to come to fruition. House Shield is trying to grow the current population and increase fishing and farming on their lands to create a self-sustaining food supply for their growing population. They are nearly completely cut off from all neighboring regions. The lands are poor and desolate, and a lot of work needs to be done if we expect it to be self-sustaining and able to break free from the meddling of House Riswell. He feared as much. This had been a reason why he hadn't wanted to give the lands to his brother. He had already decided to start heavily investing in the region, but this account only served to strengthen his resolve. If we continue on to the west side, we get to see Dragon Point and the area connecting it to the Rills and the Stony Shore. Your Grace and your brother, Lord Whitefizz, have already done much and the lands are developing at a higher rate than expected, but a lot of work still has to be done. Connectivity with their neighbors are still a problem, except for a few hidden dirt roads in the Wolfswood only known to the locals. The Mormonts are investing heavily in repairs to their keep and the increase of their naval infrastructure to prepare for an increase in the export of wood and furs from Bear Island towards the Iron Islands and the south. However, their support for House Shield is already straining their treasury, and due to their empty coffers their efforts will fall short of their goals without additional aid. Lastly, The Glovers are repairing and improving their keep and restoring the areas damaged by the Ironborn. They are in talks with some of the nearby mountain clans to increase local trade, whilst their vassals have done the same with your brother. However, none of this seems to be accompanied by plans for infrastructure aside from the occasional inn or way station for horses. I would like to interrupt you here, Roderick. What are your proposals that we should do to remedy some of these problems? These regions are quite cut off from the rest of the north, and I would like to discuss this now instead of throwing all of it together. He interjected. Very well, Your Grace. The Dustin heir responded. He grabbed some other scrolls and laid them out in front of them. I have made some proposals based on the budget of 800,000 wolves you gave me to work with. These proposals, combined with the others for other regions, amount to an estimate of 1 million golden dragons. However, I have to remind Your Grace that problems may arise due to unforeseen circumstances which could increase the costs. Therefore, I propose to delay 2 or 3 projects to the end of the summer to better manage our coin and ensure that we finish all the projects that we will be starting right away. He smiled at that. Roderick had eclipsed all his expectations as part of his council and had never stopped giving sound advice since the day he had been appointed. His knowledge and integrity were commendable, and he had declared his undying loyalty upon knowing that he had negotiated to make him the heir to House Dustin. He never failed to smile upon reading how his sons were faring in Barrow Hall. First of all, I think the road to House Riswell is a very good idea, however I wouldn't have it stop there. At Riders Spring, I would have it split into 2, one going to the keep of House Shield and the other to House Whitefee. This will increase these new houses' connectivity to the rest of the north, whilst also increasing the prosperity of the Rills. Why not connect both keeps directly? Why have them pass by Riders Spring? This would increase the power and influence of House Riswell over the region, he countered. In the short term this is true. This was done to placate the Riswells and to spare coin. Another benefit is the assured use of this route, whilst these lands are still developing. Otherwise it could become a costly affair with little use. I was also thinking about establishing a direct trade lane by ship between them directly to lessen unnecessary influence of the Riswells. Very well, I will trust your expertise on this. Where would the roads go? He asked, and for the next few minutes they looked at how the road would pass through valleys, cut through forests and would pass creeks and smaller rivers. Another road would start in Sea Dragon Point at your brother's keep of Dragon's Lair. It would cut across the peninsula and then follow the coast until it reaches Deepwood Motte. This would establish a ring road all along the western side of the north, help connect and enrich the Glovers and make sure that the Riswells do not get a sole grip on your brother's lands. The smaller dirt roads can still serve as direct avenues of trade with the Wolfswood clans, but a better and larger route to House Glover would be established that can also be used in times of turmoil. He nodded, as he looked at the map. John would love the idea. It would help develop his lands, and small settlements would probably spring up like mushrooms from the ground all along the road on his lands. It could also help create an indirect route to the mountain clans, which could keep the current migration pattern going for longer than he had hoped initially for. I think it worth to note that this road could in the future be continued on towards the Shadow Tower, by way of the seats of multiple mountain clans. However, we will not have the coin to establish that for multiple decades. He made a note of that to write about it in his journals. It might give his sons or grandsons further ideas to better the north in the future. Torrens Square is another area vastly lacking in infrastructure. Its connection to Barrowton is vital for the town to serve as a trading hub for the region, and at some points it is in a bad shape. I propose to make work of this shortly along the route it is now taking. Its connectivity elsewhere is just as bad. The roads to Riders Spring and Deepwood Motte need to be enlarged and improved, but these plans will also need to be postponed for future generations. What I do propose is improving the road to Castle Sewin. That way we ensure their direct connection to a port and to the King's Road. In this manner their extra food production could easily be transported to most of the north. It will also serve as a more direct and faster route from Winterfell to Barrowton, which will not go amiss. He made notes of these of his own and had his master of infrastructure talk him through the route these roads were now taking and the need for improvements upon it. In the end he agreed to both ideas. Then he continued on to the most northern parts of his realms. I propose to improve the connection from Roose Riswell's new keep to the King's Road. It won't do to incorporate these regions back into the realm after 200 years only for use to leave them underdeveloped. If we wish for the population to increase and to stimulate migration towards the area, they will need a way to go and ways to sustain themselves. Easier connectivity to the Umbers and Castle Black by way of the King's Road will do wonders for this, and it is a relatively small road in comparison to the other plans, only spanning around 100 miles. Having another road run towards the mountains might be a good idea, but I will look into this in the future after assessing the need for it in future rapports. He had been in the area and had travelled along the King's Road there when on his way to and from the war. It was clear that the man had never been there. The King's Road looked good on a map, but 3 days north of Winterfell it slowly lost the grandeur it had elsewhere in West Eos. Especially after you had passed into the New Gift, the road was small and in a bad condition. He told Roderick as much, to his counselor's surprise. "Apologies, Your Grace. I should have checked on this beforehand, but I never imagined. Improvements will need to be made immediately. Yet, I have already spent the whole budget with my ideas, oh no." The man's apologies had soon turned into muttering against himself as he frantically looked over numbers and started shuffling through papers. He put a hand on the man's shoulder. "Dear Roderick, calm down. It is no matter. I have seen the road for myself and can safely assess its state on my own. I see on your papers that you have prepared other plans to improve the road from Last Hearth to the King's Road." "Aye, Your Grace. Nevertheless, these plans are moot without a proper connection north of Winterfell," he countered. "Aye, it is true that 3 days north of Winterfell the road deteriorates. At first it is still in good condition, but it simply narrows and has less inns and settlements to stop at. It is only after passing the Umberlands that its state becomes what I can only call deplorable." He tried to calm his advisor. "That still leaves 150 miles of road, Your Grace. 75 of it recently transferred to your care." The man replied. I would propose we leave the lands between them and Winterfell in the same state they are now, but encourage more settlements around it as the population grows to facilitate travel. In the New Gift lands, we will have to improve the quality to that level, not the level we are used to in the Barrowlands, to limit the amount of funding needed. The funding in question I will look for partly in my own coffers, whilst also having talks with the Umbers and the Night's Watch, and I will see what I can do to keep your plans intact." Roderick looked at him. "If Your Grace deems this possible, it would be a very good solution." He nodded that he did. "Before we leave the north side, I have plans of my own too. The actual budget was 1,000,000 gold pieces, not 800,000. The others I wish to spend on my own project. I was fostered in Carhold and know personally that the roads there need work, a lot of work. Hundreds of roads need redoing, but that would be impossible. I have already spoken to my brother-in-law and he vowed to invest parts of his coin on it, but I would want to do a little more," he told his advisor as he picked out his own plans. The nobleman from the Barrowlands looked at him in wonder and leant forward to look at the plans he had written down. Better roads and infrastructure could cut down days of travel time between Carhold and Winterfell. It could also serve to promote trade between houses Carstark and Bolton, and even between the Boltons and Wintertown. Roderick Dustin looked everything over, including the calculations that he had made together with Maester Lewin from the information he had received from Harry and Dom. "This is a massive project," he remarked, after he looked at it for a long while. "Aye, it is, but all of the roadway already exists. It just needs to be expanded and improved. Most of it now is nothing more than a small and badly maintained dirt track. It would greatly improve trade in the eastern and northeastern parts of the north and almost certainly create more trade for Wintertown. You would need to build multiple larger and sturdier bridges to accomplish this width. Most notably across the White Knife and the Last River, maybe across the Weeping Water as well. The remainder are smaller, yet still substantial." "Aye, that is true, and it will take many years, but I think it worth the time and resources," he replied. "Wouldn't it mostly benefit the Boltons? The Carstark trade would massively reposition itself towards them in time." Roderick brought up. "No, it wouldn't. It would be accompanied by another project. A road from Last Hearth to Carhold. I have travelled that road before, and it is much the same. These two roads would create a backbone of trade in the area upon which the local lords can have their own roads branch off. The Karstarks and Umbers are trying to improve local trade and trade with the Skaga Sea. This would do wonders," he explained. Roderick looked over the plans for the second roadway, which was half the length of the first one but still over 300 miles long. His advisor let out a small whistle. "These are massive plans. It could indeed massively boost the local economy and it might pay itself back in multiple decades, but still. Who's to say what happens during that time? A massive winter, famine, all could delay or destroy any possibility of it paying itself back." True enough, but there are other motives for it. The increased road infrastructure could help speed up food transports, which would help to keep population numbers up in the future. It could also help our grip on these lords, as now they sometimes act like they are on their own.